Customers from across India and the world have been leaning on us for 75 years. Blue Star, built on trust. Customers from across India and the world have been leaning on us for 75 years. Blue Star, built on trust.
Hi, Martin.
Hi, Shailesh. Good afternoon. Great to be here.
Martin, and how are you, Tyag?
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Delighted to see both of you. How are you? I see Tara has also joined us. Hi, Tara.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Wonderful.
Yeah, I think you've got a really good lineup today, so it's going to be an interesting seminar.
I think so, Martin. We have, thanks to Naina's great push and Jane's leadership, we should have more than 500 people listening in from one or the other channels.
Yeah.
And if you add the YouTube, then hopefully it should double. But that's what I discussed with Tara, that we might have 1,000 people at peak, but maybe we'll certainly have 500.
Yeah, I posted it on my LinkedIn, and I saw at least I had 1,000 that had recognized it, looked at it. So.
Okay. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Hi, Neeraj. How are you?
Good, sir. Thank you very much.
Hello. Hello, Mr.
Yeah.
Agarwal. Welcome. What a delight to see you and have you with us.
Thanks for inviting and giving me this opportunity.
Oh, it's fascinating. Shailesh, I actually spoke over the weekend with the IFC
Okay.
on the subject of environmental measurements, right? And they said there's a huge interest now for that because there's so much money that wants to go into India.
Correct. Absolutely.
They want to have an established framework for it. So that's what we discussed.
You know, Neeraj here, who is next to you in my frame, and Tyag, who is next to you on the other side. Mr. Tyagarajan is the chairperson of the Western Region for CII this year.
All right.
And Neeraj is the finance director of Blue Star Limited, which also happened to be our chief sponsors. So, you know, at Blue Star, that's the one ambition we have, that we should become eligible for green bonds. So, Mr. Mathur, I'm sure you're hearing about this conversation, and we'll be able to work through IFC's requirements and all the pathways that are required to get green bonds and green financing in place. How are you, Kashmira? Welcome.
Very well, sir. How are you? Congratulations.
Very good. Very good. Great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you. And all the best to everyone on the panel. I'm sure this is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this.
So, hi, Tara.
Hi, Kashmir. How are you?
Hi, very well. How are you?
Thank you.
Hi, Tyag. Hi, Jane. Hi, Naina. Effort from your side, Naina.
Thank you so much. It's all your support also, ma'am. Everyone in the committee is supported.
Yeah. No, this has been such a lovely joint effort. Everybody in the committee, I think, Naina, you chose that expression absolutely perfectly. How is Robin doing? Is he okay? Is he able to join
fine.
us?
Okay. Yeah, he's fine.
Good.
I messaged him in the morning. He said he was better. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad.
He is publishing a book, Shailesh, a favorite subject of yours, corporate frauds.
Yeah. I've written a little note for him.
So,
so no, he's
anecdotally,
so
the book has come out well. So
you saw it? You saw it?
He asked me to review also. So
very good. Very good. How nice.
In a simple language, anyone can relate to that subject.
No, it is very good. It's a very useful book, and he has all the experiences to share. So, Madhur, what are you seeing in terms of demand for green financing in India? Is that blossoming, or what's the stage?
It's been growing exponentially. So if you look at last year, we had green issuances for about $1.3 billion in total. This year, we are already at $8 billion.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
$8 billion of international bond issuances, which are ESG bonds. So it's growing very fast.
Phenomenal.
I mean,
Hi, Robin. I'm so happy to see you.
Hello, sir.
Oh,
Good afternoon.
You're back to your sprightly self.
Yes.
I'm so happy to know.
Same here. Good afternoon, all of you. Good afternoon.
How nice to
Good
see
morning,
you.
hello, sir. Hello, Chairman, sir.
How are you, Robin?
Okay.
We were just talking about your book.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So,
On governance. G of ESG today.
yeah. And the focus on frauds is so important. If we can eliminate frauds, we would be living in a very different world.
yeah.
Then I'd like to add the focus on P, which is process.
Yep.
So we have, I guess, about 3-4 minutes to go still.
Sure.
So should all of us put our cameras off so that whoever's speaking is on focus?
Naina, what's the drill there?
Sure, sir. We can do that.
No, does that work better? So
that works better.
Bandwidth is conserved, and I think Kashmira's suggestion is very good.
Which means all of us can happily sleep. That's another advantage.
No, Robin, I'm watching.
Jane is smiling and laughing. Said, that's what you guys put it. Thank you.
रूम को एकदम ठंडा कर दो। Naina,
Please,
would you like to? Yes, please start. Yeah.
Good afternoon, participants. So we'll be organizing first ever ESG Summit of CII Western Region. And the summit is being chaired by Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti. May I now request Chairman to deliver his opening remarks, wherein he will give some perspective on the ESG as a topmost boardroom agenda of these days. And he will also share some insights on what we are going to experience as sessions during the summit. Over to you, sir.
So let me begin by offering all of you a very, very warm welcome to this first ever Summit on Sustainability by CII West. And I must say that we drew inspiration from our chairman, Mr. Tyagarajan, for putting this summit together. And let me begin my welcome address by sharing with you why I chose the dress code that I have chosen for this seminar. The white dot in my shirt represents clean air, and the light blue dot in my shirt represents clean water. And the fact that I chose to wear a black tie and a black suit is to mourn the fact that every one of the members of Earth's population do not yet have a changed mindset, which will embrace, work on, and provide full support to sustainability. It is our only home, and the onus of saving it has squarely fallen upon us. And I think one of the key purposes of this summit is to bring home that thought to all of us. And we want to show you in every which way that it is important that every one of us feels responsible. It is only if mindsets are changed at scale, at population scale, that we will actually see action on the ground on this extremely important, almost existential issue. And so we set out to get a very international set of panelists, speakers, people who will give keynotes today. And I want to welcome every one of our panelists and speakers who have been so engaged and have contributed so much to making this summit what it is. And we are all looking forward to what they will share with us. We've structured it around two major themes. One is the theme of how can we actually create the action which is required to get sustainability going in a very wide space in our economy and in the world, because we have an international global audience today. And the second part of the theme builds on how critical it is for all of us to know and feel and experience that it is not enough for you to feel safe or secure. It is perhaps more important that every person on earth is safe. And therefore, the debate has moved from vaccinating your own company or your own locality or your own office to vaccinating the entire human population against COVID. I think that is also a very fundamental aspect of the change that we are experiencing today. And we'll hear about this, I'm sure, from Martin, we'll hear from Mr. Tyagarajan, we'll hear from Mr. Jill Friend, and I'm sure that both the wonderful Socratic dialogue as well as the panel discussion will cover this subject in some depth and in some way that will give us new perspectives. And in terms of governance, what seems to have happened is that finally, the custodianship of the resources of the entire world has fallen upon corporate leadership to take seriously, to make sure that the entire economic interests that are involved in a corporation get engaged together to create not just the profits, which are a required engine, but also to make sure that people feel safe, people feel engaged, people feel that the company is responsible. If you want to attract the best talent, that's the only insurance that you have. And finally, it is absolutely important to make sure that accountability and custodianship are held in our minds in a manner that we can become the first barrier to people taking disadvantage of the resources that are put in our charge temporarily by the world. Let me also express my personal desire to see in our country that the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs as they are called, should become the basis for global competition. And those must drive all equations of power, of influence, of accountability, and measured in terms that each one of us together through a collaborative effort can produce the best outcomes for the entire ecosystem that we touch. We need to shift from power politics to people politics across the world. And my fond hope is that seminars and interactions of this kind will achieve that purpose, because they are held on a platform as well accepted as CII. CII, as we saw, for those of us who joined a little earlier, have seen the extent of footprint that CII has had on the mindset of people. And that is why I'm so happy that we are holding this summit under the aegis of CII's Western Region. And I want to again thank Mr. Tyagarajan and invite him to speak to us on this extraordinarily important subject: ESG, sustainability, and taking care of our only home, planet Earth. Thank you.
Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti, Summit Chairman, the Chairman, CII Western Region ESG Sub-committee, esteemed speakers, distinguished members from the industry, ladies and gentlemen. A very good afternoon to all of you. I must thank Mr. Haribhakti. He has been modest. This whole program has been conceived and put together by him and the steering committee of this important summit. I must also confide that the very concept of ESG is something that I learned from him. His passion for this subject is remarkable, and he has been a source of inspiration to me and my colleagues in Blue Star and many of us in CII. It is a pleasure to be part of the CII Western Region ESG Summit. This is the first one, and I think one day it will become a national event for which the property is held by the Western Region of CII. I would like to thank Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti and the CII Western Region ESG Subcommittee for conceptualizing this interesting and very relevant summit. Till last year, this committee was known as Corporate Governance Subcommittee, and Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti aptly expanded its scope to cover environment and social aspects and reinvented it as ESG Subcommittee, along with Mr. Robin Banerjee, who is the co-chair, who is also present here. I begin by invoking Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "Mother Nature has enough for our needs, but not enough for our greed." His usage of the phrase economy of nature in 1911 brings out his sensitivity and deeper understanding of human action vis-a-vis ecology. As early as 1909, he stated that the growth-oriented policies must be replaced by the theories of sustainable development, which will guarantee harmonious coexistence of man and the ecosystem. In 1938, he said, "The rule should be avoiding a car if you can walk that distance." It's not Mahatma Gandhi alone. We belong to a heritage that thousands and thousands of years ago, even our Vedas, I quote from Atharva Veda, that Mata, Bhumi, Putragan, Prithviya, which translates into do not harm the environment, do not harm the water and the flora, earth is my mother. I am her son, may the waters remain fresh, do not harm the waters, tranquility be to the atmosphere, to the waters, to the crops and vegetation. It's not just a Hindu religion. Across the world, all the scriptures were built on this foundation of sustainable development. The ongoing pandemic has helped to reach a widespread recognition of the fact that actions pertaining to ESG issues cannot be delayed further, and a strong sustainability implementation is the only way forward into new normal. Standing at the forefront of the global fight against climate change, India is the only G20 country on track to meet the 2-degree goal set under Paris Agreement. India is a relatively low per capita emitter of CO2 to begin with. Hence, India's targets are about pivoting to green energy in a big way. I'm very glad that the policy makers of the current government is also aligned to this idea. Several top Indian conglomerates and companies are taking a lead in announcing net zero targets and raising ESG-linked funds. Disclosure requirements have leapfrogged globally in the last decade, holding companies accountable for their identification of ESG responsibilities and their transparent incorporation in annual disclosures. Accordingly, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, that is SEBI, in its continued efforts to enhance disclosures on ESG standards, introduced new requirements for sustainability reporting by listed companies, which is Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report, BRSR. It aims to establish links between the financial results of a business with its ESG performance. With the BRSR implementation, businesses in India are expected to reach higher disclosure levels in their quest to be socially, environmentally, and ethically responsible. India, as a high-impact emerging market with a huge population, is on the cusp of rapid development. This presents an immense opportunity for long-term investors, not just in terms of returns, but also impact. In the post-pandemic economy, green recovery policies are also gaining momentum. For example, EU is already discussing in its Track 2 dialogue how the incentives offered by the government for the recovery could be green in nature. There are constructive and ongoing debates on stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism, and clarity and alignment begin to emerge on the roles of the investors, the board, and the executive. Many corporate players are beginning to demonstrate that the corporate purpose of profit, growth, excellence, and shareholder value creation can go hand in hand with ESG pursuit. I repeat, many corporate players are beginning to demonstrate that the corporate purpose of profit, growth, excellence, and shareholder value creation can go hand in hand with ESG pursuit. CII Circular Economy Program is also built on this principle. It is absolutely important for CII and all the ESG evangelists to work on this aspect further and sharing such examples. Another area is getting the buy-in and bringing on board the extended organization of our vendors and franchisees. A holistic climate and broader sustainable development goals, or SDD, what Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti referred to, driven ESG approach is gaining momentum. As more and more investors adopt such strategies and their impact is made tangible, we will see India becoming a rising star for ESG investors. I am guessing that in the near future, the large corporations would like to prioritize their vendors and business associates based on their ESG rating. What I mean here is, I would like to buy products from those whose ESG ratings are higher. That's what could happen in the future. CII, through its centers of excellence and committees, has been undertaking significant projects and knowledgeable initiatives across geographies to address these three elements of ESG. The CII Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development is located in Delhi, and CII Water Institute which is located in Gurugram, work on addressing the sustainability element of ESG through a multitude of projects and initiatives across India. Indian Green Building Council, which is known as IGBC, part of CII with the support of stakeholders, is spearheading the green building movement in the country since 2001. Taking forward this initiative, IGBC began the journey of ushering in a green building movement in the country. CII's National Committee on Environment, Governance, and CSR also work actively towards supporting and handholding industry in meeting the objectives laid down under the ESG agenda. Apart from this, there is a Committee and Center of Excellence on Total Cost Management, which also has got to do with the sustainable development. We also have another committee at national and regional levels on affirmative action, which is an important social issue. The CII Foundation works towards inclusive development by providing a meaningful bridge between marginalized communities and donors, especially in the corporate sector. CII members are expected to sign a code of conduct which has been in for several years in terms of ethical practices. CII is committed to creating more and more awareness on the importance of ESG among its membership and will support the industry in all possible ways to enhance their ESG quotient. What is more satisfying to me is the fact that more and more companies are believing that ESG is doable. They are not waiting for regulations on disclosures. They are not doing it for valuation. They are not doing it for raising funds. They are doing it with a sense of responsibility. I'm hopeful that today's summit will have some great takeaways for all of us and look forward to the proceedings of the day. I wish the summit a great success. I once again thank Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti, Mr. Robin Banerjee, and the entire team for putting together this extraordinary event. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We can now move on to the next session. So the next session is Green Finance to Further the Sustainability Agenda. May I now call upon Mr. Madhur Agarwal, Managing Director, JP Morgan, to address the delegates. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Thiagarajan. Good afternoon, Mr. Haribhakti, distinguished speakers, industry participants, and ladies and gentlemen. I feel honored to be part of this session, to be able to talk to you about developments which we are seeing on the debt capital market side in the ESG forum. Just give me a minute, I'll put up the presentation. So I think Mr. Haribhakti had laid a great path of why ESG is the flavor of the day, why it's no longer a fashion, but a need which everybody is required to follow. And we are seeing that across investors and issuers. If you look at a survey which was done across for CEOs across the globe, 99% CEOs feels that ESG would be important or very important for the business. This is being driven by global investors who want to factor in environmental, social, and governance aspects in anything when they're looking to invest. So ESG is the data point which they use while making investment, what they call as sustainable investing. So they want to be careful how their investments impact the environment and consider those points when they look at companies, either for equity investment or debt investment. Growing importance is also reflected in the amount of assets which can only be used for investment in sustainable space. So if you look at assets of sustainable mutual funds or exchange traded funds, these are expected to grow to $2 trillion by end of 2028. I think Asia is still lacking in awareness about this aspects. Bulk of these investors are located in US and Europe, which contribute over 75 or 85% of these investment opportunities. Coming closer to our home, how ESG debt issuances have been growing in Asia and India. So if you look at the bottom left-hand graph, what it shows is that ESG issuances have been gradually growing, but we have seen a major boost this year. Year till date volume has jumped 140% compared to the period last year, and that's for Asia. If you look at India, we have seen an 8x jump. So in India, the ESG market started way back in 2015 when Export-Import Bank of India had issued the first international green bond from India. That time the market was very nascent and it has evolved into a very big market now, as reflected in the 8x jump this year. Why are we seeing such a big jump? That is reflected in how the ESG issuances trade in secondary and what pricing benefit you get. If you look at top left-hand corner, we have on the graph two charts. One is average yield on the JP Morgan Asia Credit Index, and second is only ESG bonds. So ESG bonds are now trading about 75 basis point tighter as compared to the normal curve. And the growth of issuances is across sectors, with finance companies, energy, and governments corresponding to nearly 60% of the issuances. So as you all may be thinking, why should you be pursuing an ESG debt instrument? And the benefits are multifold. It allows you investor diversification, as you are able to tap into investors who only want to look at ESG compliant companies. You get lower pricing. Your bonds do well in secondary, which means your subsequent issuances can even be further tighter yields. You are able to demonstrate your environmental and social priorities, which all shareholders, stakeholders look at, and it also creates a favorable public perception about the companies as and when they look at ESG issuances. Coming to when you are looking at an ESG issuance, what options really do corporates have? So I would say there are two broad categories. One is linked to end use, where you identify and use the proceeds for specific purposes, and they can be classified into three subcategories. Green, if you are using the proceeds for green uses like renewable energy, pollution prevention, green building, clean transportation. They could have a social end use. When you are looking to use proceeds for creating affordable infrastructure, housing, food security, access to essential services, or what is called as sustainable, which is essentially a mix and use between green and social. Good thing is that not many companies could have, say, a large amount of identified green uses. So the framework gives you flexibility. You can allocate proceeds which you would have used for these purposes over the last 3 years, and even what you plan to use for next 2 years. So as long as you can allocate proceeds for these purposes in a 5-year time frame, you could still do an ESG issuance. A number of Indian companies have accessed this market, including recently we did Axis Bank did a sustainable bond. Shriram did a social bond earlier this year. Many renewable companies have been doing green bond. The second the second category is what we call a sustainability linked bond. And this is a category which is growing a lot. Not all companies may have identified green uses. Sectors such as steel, cement, and all are inherently carbon intensive sectors and may not have a green use. So how do these companies demonstrate their commitment to the environment? And that comes what we call as a sustainability linked bond. Here the companies set targets in terms of reducing carbon emissions or reduction in water intensity or higher use of renewable energy, and specified targets are set. So they set the performance indicators and what targets they will meet over a period of 5 to 10 years. So the bond end use is a general purpose corporate end use, but by setting up performance indicators with aggressive targets to reduce carbon emissions or other norms, they are showing their commitment to environment. And this is a category which started very late. In fact, first issuance was only in 2019, but it's growing at very rapid pace. This year itself, we had $49 billion of issuance out of total issuance of 56 billion since 2019. A few things to keep in mind when you are looking at an ESG bond. From a cost perspective, this is similar to raising any other international bond. No real difference. Only incremental cost is in terms of a second party opinion, which is pretty minimal at around $20,000 to $25,000. Timing perspective also, it's not really different from any other international issuance. And you can work on ESG framework in parallel to the bond documentation. I already talked about the use of proceeds. You nearly get a 5-year period within which you need to demonstrate use. There are certain restrictions on use of proceeds. Investors do not want proceeds to be used for nuclear, fossil fuel assets, biomass, which could be used for food sources, gambling, tobacco, etc. And then ongoing, there is a requirement to prove to investors that you have indeed used the proceeds as you had mentioned in the offering documents. And second, what's the impact you have been having on environment? So you need to agree on those matrices and produce those reports on an annual basis. Going into a bit more detail on the green bond and the social bond, here I've listed a few additional end uses to give you more clarity of whether you would have any end use which could qualify for an ESG issuance. This is not a regulated market, but market participants have broadly come together what is called as a green bond principles. These are guidelines which were formed by a few market participants, including banks and climate initiatives and a few regulators. JP Morgan was one of the co-author of these green bond principles. They give guidelines in terms of the transparency, the disclosure, the reporting requirements. On the social side, in terms of end use, aim is that the proceeds should be benefiting a certain targeted population, either people below poverty line, undereducated, underserved, unemployed. So I think there is a lot of flexibility. The aim is that you are doing something which is leading to either an environmental or a social benefit. Talking a bit more on a sustainability linked bond, there are 5 core principles to think of. One is identifying the key performance indicator. So like in case one key indicator many companies use is a reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. Second is you agree on what's the target reduction you will have. For example, JSW Steel, which just did a dollar bond, they had set a target of that they will reduce carbon emissions from 2.54 tons of carbon dioxide per ton of steel to 1.95 level by 2030. And then you have certain features in the bond that in case you do not meet these targets, there would be a financial penalty or your interest rate on the bonds will increase or reduce if you start with a higher interest rate. You need to agree what matrices you would be reporting and at what period. And last thing is hiring a auditor or a second party opinion provider to do a verification of these targets. A bit more practical aspect in terms of what all you need to consider if you are looking at a green bond issuance. First step is defining a broader framework and what use of proceeds you can establish. And here the financing team may need to work with sustainable team, investors relations, accounting departments to decide on what proceeds can be used for. Second is now this is becoming increasingly important that investors look for a second party verification of your framework. So there are many reputed international second party opinion providers who are expert in this area and who will do a review of your use of proceeds, your framework, and provide an opinion that how sustainable this is or what benefit it has on environment. We agree on the marketing material where we'll talk about your process in more detail, plus agree on either an auditor or a second party opinion provider who will do a verification. Then we work on due diligence questions, because when you go meet investors, they would want to understand your framework in more detail. Just calling an issuance green bond is not good enough. People actually want to see what impact you are having and are you being in aggressive in what you are proposing. You meet investors, do calls with them, explain this, and post that is an execution and reporting. Last thing I want to highlight is in terms of how investors look at these issuances. As I mentioned, they want to understand this in more detail, and just calling green doesn't serve the purpose. So they do have their own negative list that if you have an end use which is part of the negative list, they would not be looking to invest. They also look at your ESG ratings, second party opinions to see where you stand up in hierarchy. Even if you may not have external ratings, they have their own internal benchmark. They look at the impact your proposed issuance would be having on the environment. They would engage with you, try to get more details and see how well that engagement is. They also look at financial materiality of the impact you are having. And last, investors are also working actively with industry participants because they want to mold the way companies look at ESG framework and what more can be done on this part. I'll pause here to see if there are any queries.
Thank you very much. I think that was very, very lucid and very valuable. Naina, back to you.
Now we move on to our next session, which is on weather predictability and its unforeseen effects. May I now invite Mr. Martin Malmros, CEO and founder Below to Impact Solutions. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Nami. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martin Malmros, and I'm the CEO of Snowcap. I work with sustainability for about 27 years now, helping companies, governments, organizations to become more sustainable through insights and through technology solutions. And what I thought we'd talk about today is how what you do in the boardrooms actually affect the weather. So I'm going to share a presentation with you. Here we are. Let's see why it doesn't go up into. Or it seems to be locked here for some reason. I'll stop share and share again. Well, we seem to have a bit of a technical problem here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir, we can see it.
We can see your screen. There's no problem.
Unfortunately,
go right ahead.
It doesn't have go up in screen mode for some reason. So I can't move it.
Would you like to just put it on the slideshow?
Yeah. Let's see, Nayana, maybe we can do it the other way that you share it then.
Yes, sir, we can do it.
Okay, so if we go into the screen mode.
Lovely. There we are.
Well, there we are at the very end of the presentation. So let's start from the beginning. And I assume you can just click when I say click then. So let's just start clicking. I'll talk to it, Nayana, right? So what's happened is that we used to be a very small tribe of humans on a big planet. Now we are a huge tribe on a very small planet, meaning that we actually create the climate change, and the climate change drives the weather. So, Nanyana, to do this best, if I just raise my hand when you click?
Sure, we can do that.
Yeah, okay. Please, go on. Nayana? Can you move on? Right, so please go on. This is basically an up-to-date scientific-based report where we go through some of the data that was generated by the IPCC report in August. The IPCC report is a scientific report which combines around 10,000 other scientific reports into one comment to say what's actually the fact and what's based. Please move on. And what I'd like to start with is to explain that the climate change, they cause increase in weather extremes. And at the current rate, we would actually see about 500 million people having to move to a new location to live by 2060, unless something is changed. And the fundamental reason for that is because the place that they live today will not be livable in as little as 40 years from now if the weather extremes and the climate change continue. Please click on, Ayana. Yeah, so please go on and click. Sorry for that. We will look at three things today. The first one is climate outlook. We will also look at the fires and the ice melting to give you an idea what's happening currently this summer. And fundamentally after that, we will go on to look at what we can do to change these events, how we can take actions that stop this development. So please move on. Yeah, we can go into the next slide, please. Let's start at the heat waves that's raging across the globe at the moment. In this summer, if you just keep clicking Diana fairly quickly, then we will be able to do this presentation fairly quickly. In this summer, on the 11th of August, the town Syracuse in Sicily reached 48.8 degrees Celsius. That is the warmest temperature ever in Europe. And the unfortunate thing is that it looks like it's just going to continue to rise. And what happens when we get to these extreme temperatures is that people start dying at a higher rate, and we destroy the environment by fires occurring from self-bursting. One example is in Russia this summer, where there was a fire, a forest fire, the size of India at one time. And for the first time in history, over the 650,000 years we measured the ice on the North Pole, smoke reached the North Pole. That is an extreme beyond anything. Please go on. Another way of looking at this is to just take a picture from the NASA satellite and look, where do we have fire at one given point in time? And this is a picture from June, even before actually the Russian fire was at it's starting to peak. And you can see the orange areas, that there are massive areas that are on fire, and they contribute immensely to suffering and erode of wealth for humanity. And worth to notice here that is in India, it's still a agricultural practice to start fires on purpose, which causes severe problems of air quality in Delhi area, amongst others. Please move on. If we look at the ice and the ice melting, why is this such a big topic? Well, the main reason is, of course, that with the ice melting, the sea level rise will increase incrementally over the next couple of 100 years. And to give you an example, just to understand the extent of where we already are, in Greenland on the 27th of July, I just picked one day, there was 23.4 degrees in Greenland. And the ice melting in that day would have covered Florida with 5 centimeters of water. We are, of course, and we named our company Snowcap just for the reason to highlight the effect that, you know, we won't have snowcaps anymore unless we do something. And the big thing here is, of course, the South Pole, the Antarctic. If that ice melts, that is 60 meters of sea level rise. It's predicted to happen in the next 200 years, but we are on an exponential curve, so it might be faster. And there's not one city, one coastal city that could survive such a rise. Please, next. And what I did was here, I wanted to pick up some climate anomalies and events for this summer. And this is a registration of officially what's happening. And in July this year, again, July this year was the highest July ever measured in terms of temperature. And the temperature is measured, you know, on surface with tens of thousands of indicators. So it's not like, it's very much science-based. And we don't have time today to go through all the events, but what you can see is that they are spread across the globe. It's happening everywhere. In Sweden this year, there was rains that was totally unnormal for Sweden. You can find these events everywhere on the planet, and they will continue. So let's look at the next slide. If we go on and have a look at the climate outlook, and I'll base it again, as always, on scientific reports, right? It's been confirmed that we will reach the 1.5 degree increase before 2030. So we've actually, what we decided in 2016 in the Paris Agreements, we already bypassed that in 9 years from now. We can reverse it if we reach carbon zero emissions globally by 2050. But that means all businesses will have to be carbon free. Currently, we're tracking towards around 2.8 degrees until 2200. And this level is by most scientists considered a non-revocable cycle. That means that when we get to that kind of temperature rise, methane starts to leak from the tundra in Russia and so on, and it would escalate even further the temperature rise. And there is a substantial risk, of course, that the Earth could start looking like Mars eventually, and we can't live here. So we need to address the actions that cause the climate change to reduce negative impacts. And before we move on to what we can do, let's look at the next slide, just to show that it's not just data from a day in June or July. We've done measurements on the ice on the polars, where you basically drill down, and for each year there's a level of ice, and you can track how much carbon is then in that specific years. And if you take the last 650,000 years, it's been very stable. It goes up to 280. That's when we have, you could say, more of a warmer climate on the planet, and it goes down to 180. That's when we have the ice ages. And all human development has happened in this space. And for 650,000 years, it's fairly stable. But what happens is that when the industrialization came into play from 1950, it's gone up to 360. And that's the whole reason why we have the temperature rise and why we have the climate change. And this is an unrevocable evidence of that humans cause climate and that cause the weather. So let's look at the next slide. Basically, the question is what can be done? And if we start with the consumers is basically affecting the climate by what they buy and how they use it. And most people instinctively know what is good and bad for the environment in most cases. Also, when it comes to children, for example, if you ask them, they would know instinctively as well that we are polluting the planet. So what is it that we should think about as consumer? Well, basically, it's all more or less, the most of it is related to fossil fuels, right? Cars, planes, plastic, cooling, packaging. And you should also be aware from a board perspective that the consumer awareness and the consumer interest in doing good, buying sustainable, is increasing massively. As an example, the country's population that are most concerned about plastic packaging and waste is India's population. It has a much higher level of concern than any other country in the world, actually. And why is that? Because they can see the waste when they go to the office or when they go home. It's everywhere. So consumers are aware and wanting to have companies providing them with more sustainable solutions. If we move on to companies, the main thing here when you talk about companies is, of course, what and how you produce. And I want to make it a small definition clear here for everyone. When we talk about ESG, from a company perspective, it's the same as sustainability. And in a business context, sustainability is about the business model you have for a company, what products and services they produce, and how that contribute to sustainable development or non-sustainable development. Despite this, most companies lack systems or solutions to fairly represent the environmental impact on product level. And let me explain that a little bit further. if you sit on a board, there's no board I know who would accept not to have a financial ledger for the company. You know, you can't run a company without having a record of its financial performance. Yet there's a big lack. Most companies don't have any carbon ledger, any understanding of that. If they do, it's often in an Excel form, and that needs to be evolved and excelled over the next 5 years significantly. Another thing is the understanding that we're not just talking about what's happening inside your company, we're talking about the whole supply chain. And I come back to that, what I think you guys should be focused on as board members. Striving for strong ESG performance, or striving for any ESG performance, is an absolute crucial topic that board needs to start to focus more on. And asking the right questions is of course something to learn, but start asking and demand higher granularity of the information is key. So if we, from that perspective, move on to the next slide. I want to make it absolutely clear that from the world's perspective, as board and management, you are responsible. There's no way you can avoid that responsibility. You need to enter a journey towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions. That is your responsibility as the board. And I'll make it simple for you and say that what you need to focus on. Well, if it's before or after your factory gates, what's outside your own production, it is material, it is energy, it's logistics that should be your core focus. That's where you find the biggest improvement areas. And if you give me another click on the page, when we look inside the factory gate, it's the water, it's the waste and the energy you use inside your factory that should be your focus. If you do that, then of course you will achieve big impact. So moving on from that, we can say, what have I and the rest of the sustainability community of practitioners learned over the last 25 years? Well, that is, of course, you need to focus on the process and what you need to do. And it starts with baselining. It starts with you and your company understanding where you are inside your company and with your supply chain to say, what is our impact? And often we talk about carbon footprint, which is basically how you define what is the carbon impact of a material or an event. An event could be a production or logistics, and material, of course, is what you use for the product, and how it flows through the whole life cycle of the product from material to the consumer and to the end of life. Once you have that, then it's time to set some targets. Of course, you will have to set the target carbon neutral by 2050, because that is what 70% of the world's countries and world's economy and 60% of the world's countries already committed to. After that, it's time for the gap analysis to see what can we improve and what is key. And there, after that, it's about execute and measure. Another few tips from me on when you have such a fairly simplistic process, but quite exhaustive to do on your own if you don't have the experience. I would say that try to use a data-driven process. Science and research, among other, McKinsey, say that it's 2.5 times more likely that you will be a successful company if you combine a digitalization process with a a digitalization strategy with a sustainability strategy, so that you move your company on both those ledgers at the same time, digitalization and sustainability. Then you need to engage your supply chain and the management in this process. They are the ones to contribute, and it can't just be for supply chain as it's been the last 30 years, lean and mean. It has to become green and clean. And therefore, you can only work in collaboration with them. I'd like to stress that I'm fairly convinced no unsustainable companies will survive 2050. The rate at which we are changing is so hard. Often companies say to me when I start with them, yeah, you know, it's tough and we don't know how to do this. Well, it is a challenge, but you need, the earlier you embrace on that journey, the earlier you will become more sustainable. And lastly, on that slide, I would say you have to embrace Consumer Connect. It is the consumers that will be the, should I say, the demanding factor here saying, we're not going to buy from this company because there's an alternative here who does it in a better way. So this is very key in terms of having a fairly simplistic process and then understanding how you embrace and work with that process in an efficient way. If we move on to the last slide, or next last, is actually just a small tip from me what board members can do right now. What do you do after this session today? Well, start spending an hour a day on ESG. You have to get to know this subject at heart. And today you spend 3 hours if you're in this session, which is very good. Doesn't mean you shouldn't spend an hour tomorrow. Keep going. And lastly, on that note, I know that we are a bit short of time here today. So if you have any questions, need any more information, please contact me at martin.snowcap@snowcap.com. And with that, I say a thank you. And remember that what you do in the boardroom affects the weather. You are responsible and in charge, and it's you guys, it's the community of companies that will help us change this ship around. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. That was amazing. You have frightened us into becoming more responsible. And we commit to 1 hour a day on ESG. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will now move on to our next session, which is we have a set of 2 dialogues, that is Socratic dialogues on ESG, a pivot to clean converged technology. May I now invite our moderator for the panels, Ms. Kashmira Mewawala, who is Chairman CII Western Region Sub-committee on International Trade. She is also the Head of Business Development and Chief Ethics Counselor for Tata Capital Limited. Over to you, Ms. Mewawala.
Thank you very much, Naina, and thank you, Shailesh Haribhakti and Robin Banerjee and everyone on the call. So let's start with the Socratic Dialogue 1, Youth versus Adult Aspiration on the broader subject of ESG. What can I do to change the world? A very powerful and a well-meaning statement from the youth who are the future. Repeatedly, we find and we read about how the younger generation, the millennials, Gen Y, they want to better the world. Most of them are very conscious of the environment. Many are aware of the relevant issues that affect them and the world. For Gen Y, that have the opportunity to create and drive new businesses, their aspirations we very often find go beyond the traditional P&L accounts and profits. They move to sustainability, to looking at using the right technology, to clean energy, green environment, and also considering the impact their business and products have on creating the world. In Socratic Dialogue 1, I'm delighted to welcome Dasika Prabhakar and Akanksha Sharma. Akanksha is the Global Head ESG, Social Impact and Sustainability at Sterlite Technologies. She's the Public Policy Specialist with an eclectic 14-year-plus career, which ran across 4 continents in various leadership roles and strategic roles at large corporations and UN agencies. Welcome, Akanksha. Are you on the call, Akanksha? If you could just put your camera on, please.
It is on. Can you see
Yeah,
me?
thanks. Yeah, I can now. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to tell the audience that everyone's detailed profiles are updated on CII HIVE, so you may actually want to check it out there. I'd also like to welcome Dasika Prabhakar, who's a sustainability consultant and project manager, Sustainability IIT Madras Research Park. She's a techno-commercial expert in environmental sustainability and has successfully developed and scaled up technologies which include low-cost biopolymer films and chemical degradation of petrochemical polymers and sanitary napkins made from industrial waste. Very warm welcome to you, Dasika, as well. We're very privileged to have you both with us and hear your views on the aspirations of youth compared to the adult generation. So let me begin with you, Akanksha. In our conversations that we had earlier this week, and I'm going to borrow a phrase that you used, that the ESG space is dominated by the sentiments of the millennials. How is the younger generation influencing and accelerating the push towards cleaner and greener technology? You know, everything, whether it's their mindset, its process, and even in the creation of products. So over to you, Akanksha.
Thank you, Kashmira, and thank you for having me here, firstly. Well, when I said that, I think we should also not forget that many millennials inherited their values from their baby boomer parents, and whose voices led to the establishment of first sustainable funds in 1970. So, of course, I mean, millennials are taking the baton forward, but I think it's also the baby boomer generation and the Gen X that that has played a pivotal role in ESG establishment as a core concept. But I think largely in the ecosystem and globally, the millennials are definitely voicing out, and there is a very clearly charted expectation for organizations to be more ethical on environmental and social aspects. And governance has already always been a core agenda, with good corporate governance practice, But I think it's becoming more and more pushed by also the new age investors, and that is why I said that I think till the time investment community is bringing it to the forefront, millennial will always try to embrace this as a core concept. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And I'd like to move now to Desika. Desika, you experienced this at very close quarters. You actually, along with your family, set up a very environment-friendly business of creating fashion products, including T-shirts out of recycled plastic. So can you share some thoughts, share some of your stories around this, please?
Yes, ma'am. So happy evening to everyone. And first, I just want to start off with a small layman analogy of how I see ESG. So I think ESG is more like the new Calendly app which we use, which helps us to assess and schedule and chart out our way forward for every action that we take with respect to the environment. To answer your question, as you mentioned, we had both my father and uncle had initially started off the business to use post-industrial as well as post-consumer waste into a more down cycle products, the initial terms, with their experience of 30 years. But taking in youth into consideration, when my brother and I came into the picture, we tried to see it in a more holistic and circular point of view, and that's how we started converting PET bottles into T-shirts. So we take fibers from the PET bottles, infuse it with sustainable cotton, and convert it into a sustainable product line. So here, a very important thing we also discussed in our previous discussions was to see circularity. That is, when we use PET bottles, both the bottle caps as well as the labels were dumped earlier for cost in government land. So what we tried to do is collaborated with IIT to use them as well to convert them into products or naturally biodegrade them. So in this way, we try to develop a more circular point of view and bring in sustainability from the youth side.
So that's really very interesting. Thank you. You want to quickly share your website address?
Yeah, I can drop it down. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Thank you. So let me move on quickly now to, we see that the need and applicability of ESG and clean tech or environmental sustainability really covers the entire spectrum, whether it's a large corporate, it's a mid-sized organization, SMEs, MSMEs, everyone. Akanksha, from your very large global corporate perspective, how has the shift happened to clean technology? And did you really see a generational change also when you were dealing with people?
Yes, of course. I think the pandemic has also been one of the biggest contributors. And in terms of accelerating the demand for ESG and bringing it to the forefront, especially from the investment strategies perspective, and which has also fueled the whole conversation and narratives about embracing clean technology. But I think when we talk about clean tech, environment always takes precedence over social and governance. But we should also not forget that, technology is also one of the very important tools to connect the last mile and, provide sustainable solutions and bring them to the mainstream. So my point here is to also not leave the social and governance when we talk about clean technology. So it is not just about the carbon footprint and the circularity and the waste economy that we generally talk about, but it is also about how can technology become a more enabler for connecting the last mile and the bottom of the pyramid. So yes, definitely. I mean, in my little experience over the last few years, this has definitely become very centered boardroom agenda. And I think, but this is only the beginning. I think with the kind of movements happening globally, it is sure to rise much more.
So we heard Martin actually remind us that we need to spend 1 hour over it every day. So this is something you might want to introduce as an addition to your boardroom agenda as well. So thank you for that. Desika, you play a very large role, I'm sure, with the SMEs and the MSMEs in your role at IIT. And we know that in the Indian context, it's the SMEs and the MSMEs who are really driving the economy so substantially, whether it's actually the economy and employment as well. So to what extent have you seen, when actually people, come to you for advice or come to you for project work, are you seeing that, how difficult or how easy is it for SMEs and MSMEs to adopt this sort of technology, move from traditional to cleaner technology? And you might want to share an example because you would have so many.
Yes. So having started off as part of SMEs and MSMEs, when we started off the business itself, I've seen that India overall itself is more dominated by these SMEs and MSME structures, where there's more of a fragmented structure and more businesses are being outsourced. So when we look into how they play a role in reporting and how they can converge into cleaner tech, I would say that SMEs and MSME are very much lacking into the contributions here, because of the thin margins and the more defined clientele operations that they undertake. So if we are to kind of push them into or nudge them into this direction of reporting and taking in more cleaner tech, I would say there's two steps where we can do this. So they operate in clusters in general. There are 40-50 companies in industrial locations where all these MSMEs and SMEs operate together. So if we could do a more combined reporting, maybe if the government can initiate something of a combined reporting of all these industries together, and then quantify all that data. Based on that data, we can move towards proposing them with cleaner tech, like say solar or carbon capture technologies or effluent treatment, anything for that matter, but from a value addition perspective. If we can make sure that's profitable to them, maybe with respect to selling byproducts or cutting down on their energy, all of that, if we can give them a value addition, then I think it's going to be the best thing for them when mandatory reporting comes in, and they can take it more as a more sustainable practice and habit in the future.
I think you're giving CII an idea. We need to start doing this from an MIDC, as an example, from an MIDC perspective, or the industrial zones. Maybe Rajan, our chairman, is on the call, and this is something we should take up next as well. So great thought, Desika. Thank you for that. One more question for you. In your role as in IIT, you have assisted multiple projects. And many startups have turned to you for advice on projects or solutions. And with your techno-commercial expertise, it comes to you naturally, right? And a lot of the startups today are all, by the younger generation. So how close do you see this link, or the direct link between the youth and the drive for cleaner and greener energy? And anything with sustainability.
Yes, so definitely I had the privilege to work with some amazing minds. Even the first off the bat, I can say a 14-year-old girl who had discussed with me on her idea for a solar ironing cart. So I think that kind of thinking would be like a super duper hit, especially in Indian economy. So I was really, impressed with her, and she even motivated me on doing something more. And to come to more startup based examples, so I can give you two examples where one of the companies in our IIT Madras Research Park itself, they're working on nano fertilizers. So instead of carrying those big heavy fertilizer bags, with so much of labor intensive nature and all the problems in emissions and logistics, this is literally, the size which fits in within your fingers, and that is going to really contribute more sustainably. And coming towards effluent treatment, how effluent treatment is playing a role, even that they're taking it so seriously and trying to develop sustainable technologies there. So one company is working on treating effluents from textile industries, where microbes can eat up all the pollutants and while generating electricity. So this is again where value addition kicks in, and the companies can benefit from the electricity, and it will be a win-win for all. So such I can keep giving you more examples. So this is how their frame of mind and sustainability is really thriving among youth at the present stage. So when these startups convert into businesses and they start reporting as well, it's going to really motivate the future generations and those people to follow.
Absolutely, and this is something we should follow and track so closely. and maybe people like Akanksha and the more learned people on the call, we should actually be assisting these startups in commercializing these technologies for a much larger impact. So that was very interesting. Akanksha, I come to you. I know we are running out of time, but I just want a quick question with you. With this growing importance of ESG and its big link to financing, we heard all our earlier speakers actually allude to the financing and the investor interest, particularly the global investors. The G of ESG also becomes so important to ensure that what we are reporting and what we are telling the market is absolutely accurate. And there's so much of discussion going around greenwashing. Yeah, do you want to shed some light on that?
Well, yes, I think so. Greenwashing and all the kind of criticism will go hand in hand, but I think it is also a sort of transition and a transient phase for all of us, particularly in India. And till the time we do not have BRSR and a very standard reporting formats into place that will standardize sustainability reports of large organizations and bring a sort of indexing into place. So I think that we are definitely gearing up for a sort of benchmarking with the global peers, and this is required. But nevertheless, I think we must also appreciate the fact that a lot has happened over the last 1 decade, because of the simple reason that today we are talking about funding startup ideas which were on sustainability, to mainstreaming the ESG agenda right away in the boardrooms, to having national policies on climate change. So I think a lot has happened, but yes, on the reporting and disclosures, it's a very long way to go.
So thank you so much for that. And I give you 30 seconds each for your last closing remarks. So you want to start, Akanksha, and then to Desika?
30 seconds on ESG is too less, but I think, it is also for each one of us to say that, ESG as an agenda is though, seen only with respect to organizations, but it is also about individuals, that how much do we look at, environment and social aspects, and, what responsibilities do we play in our daily lives. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Desika?
So I think ESG is going to act like a bridge between 4 important pillars of corporate, SMEs, MSMEs, researchers, and the government, because when they all work in cohesion, both the youth can help the companies who are coming out with more transparency on their data to address their problems and build a more circular economy there. So here youth and adult are going to just work together and use ESG as a bridge to create a more better planet for us. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Create a better planet for all of us. And thank you so much for those wise words from Akanksha and Desika. Please don't go away. Stay with us. Yeah. We move to the Socratic Dialogue 2. But if we have time, we'll take some questions from the audience at the end of that. And as we move to the second dialogue, may we have on the screen Santosh Jayaraman and Thara, please. And Santosh Jayaraman is partner and head sustainability and CSR advisory at KPMG. He leads one of the biggest consulting teams in the space of sustainability and ESG in South Asia. He has worked with more than 150 companies over 2 decades in projects covering over 20 countries. Detailed CVs are all available on CII HIVE, as I said earlier. Thara is a thought leader, a strategist, and co-founder of CEO ESG Minds. Prior to that, she's worked for almost 2 decades with multiple companies, including Tata Consultancy Services. I say that because she's a Tata colleague in very many roles. So it's an honor to have you today with us, both Thara and Santosh. Thank you so much, and welcome to the Socratic Dialogue 2, Global Frameworks to Bring in Convergence. We heard Akanksha talk about, some of the reporting, which is important, and we now move very, very logically into the global frameworks to bring in that convergence. Do we have Santosh on the screen? Santosh and Thara both, please.
Yes.
Hi, Santosh.
Hi.
So ESG analysis and reporting can provide very valuable insights and help create long-term value for stakeholders. We heard it earlier today as well. We see that investors, consumers, governments, employees, and all stakeholders are demanding, literally, for corporations to demonstrate sustainable business practices. And this is increasing at a fairly exponential rate. How do we ascertain that what we're doing is right? We heard this in management many, many years ago, that it's only what you measure, you can monitor, and what you monitor, you can improve. So I'm coming back to the basics of management in the ESG framework. And Santosh, I turn to you for this. There's a business case for ESG. Investors have now started chasing ESG, which is leading to increased due diligence and the rise of very multiple reporting frameworks. Can you shed some light on all the global reporting frameworks that we hear about around the world? And do you see the need for a convergence of these reporting frameworks? Over to you, Santosh, and thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, isn't ESG the term in vogue? So I think, some people who are from outside India may not understand this corollary, what I'm speaking, but when the government of India made CSR mandatory, many of the social sector players started saying they are CSR experts. And I could see that coming. And I think now everybody is looking into ESG. And I think even I did this this thing with Google Trends as to the use of terms of ESG and use of terms of sustainability, corporate responsibility, and all those things. You can very clearly see from that trend that, till about 2018, the use of the ESG term was pretty low. And it was post 2018, it just picks up like a hockey stick. And today it is at par with the use of the term sustainability in the media. So I think within 2 years, it has kind of really boomed. And if you really ask, it's not a new term. It was as early as 2004, the first reference of the term ESG you can find. And so it has been there for quite some time, but it really peaked in the last two and a half years, mainly as the reasons what you pointed out, that the financial sector really started looking into it in a big manner. So when money starts chasing something, it becomes important, right? So I think that's exactly the key difference which has happened. So I think, and why did money chase something? Because some of the risks started precipitating. The so-called ESG risks, what we were talking about. I think people were talking about long-term, and even today I am hearing that term long-term. I don't think it is long-term. I think the last presentation which you had seen, I don't think it is long-term anymore. The first bankruptcies because of climate change has happened. So that's kind of pushing the investors, the risk. There are products, services which are at risk. So it won't have a market going forward. So I think there is money at stake, and that is really pushing. And that is the disclosure trend, right? As an investor, I need that disclosure from the company, which very clearly brings out what is the risk for my money if I invest into that particular company. So disclosures become important. But having said that, when something is in vogue, suddenly there will be multiple players who will come out with various formats, and it is happening around. We had, the old reportings were there, the GRIs and, the integrated reporting framework was there. SASB came out, now they have joined together. So those were there. Then you had the World Economic Forum coming out with them. Now IFRS is joining them. So I think there will be, every one of them would come out with their own reporting requirements. Which is because it's something which is new, and everybody wants to say that they are different. They are different. I should say that as well. So I think from that aspect, you will find the different disclosures coming up. But more and more, I would say, although people call it as different disclosures, we go into the real nitty-gritties of a particular disclosure element. It is almost the same. So I would say that there is about a 70% overlap between most of these. Is there a requirement for unified framework? I think anybody from the financial world would say that, like the financial accounting standards, there is a universal requirement for that. But will it take time? Yes, definitely it will take time. And I think you can also think about that the financial standards took nearly a century to be unified. So I think I'm not saying it will take that much of time, but definitely it will take some time to get a unified standard around ESG.
Thank you for that, Santosh. So we all agree that there's a need for reporting frameworks. We have multiple reporting frameworks. We see a need for convergence of these formats. And I move to you, Thara, to say, the world over, what are the efforts in this direction, to ensuring that there is convergence in these reporting formats?
So if we take stock of it, Currently, there are at least 4 different global exercises that have been initiated in the last 18 months towards the convergence effort. Number 1, to start with, World Economic Forum and the Big Fours coming together last year, and they delivered to something quick and concise. Number 2, these standard setters themselves coming together and then signing an agreement that will come out with something that can be common and everybody can use across geography, industry, everyone can use. They started working on it. Within few months after they started, as Santosh was saying, IFRS came to picture and talking about the need for establishing the Sustainability Standards Board. And again, so these 3 initiatives, if you look at, they are kind of interrelated because they're working with the same set of reporting frameworks and also same set of stakeholders in it. So it makes sense to think that in some point in time, the outcome of these efforts may converge into one. And the 4th different effort that is happening parallelly is the one that is being put in place by EU, European Union. So they've always been leading anything on the topic of sustainability. So they just started replacing which was earlier called to be non-financial reporting directive. They changed the name itself because it's not anymore non-financial. So changed it to something like CSRD, which is Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is even more extensive, expanded the mother of all that we can think of probably, and which is going to be mandated for 50,000 companies now. So these are the 4 different things that is happening.
Thank you for that, Tara. And I want to address my next question to you as well. How ready do you think we are in India? When we look at what SEBI has already mandated with the BRSR, the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting, which will be applicable to the top 1,000 companies in terms of market cap, the large companies. How ready do you think is India Inc.? I know that first year is going to be voluntary and after that mandatory. So can you shed some light on, what is happening in India?
Yeah, so when you look at this global exercises that are going on, when you look at the sheer number of different stakeholders that they need to work with and the complexities of the jurisdictions that they're addressing, we can see this is really going to take time. As Santosh was saying, this is really going to take a lot of time before they agree. It's only when we start to think from that angle, we can really see how decisive and quick SEBI was in establishing BRSR. From consultation to regulation, in less than 9 months, everything happened. And also, but does that mean, and even before BRSR, we were like, India was like one of the top countries were having established sustainability reporting practices. Thanks to our mandated CSR reporting and BRR before, we were already there. Now with BRSR, we're going to be very well established there. But then does that mean India Inc. is all ready and set to move to the new world? We have to really think, and we have to see that the distance from BRR to BRSR is quite significant. BRSR is significantly more comprehensive, more prescriptive, more quantitative, and it has also looked into all types of the global frameworks to see what best can be taken. So this has become extremely complex. So coming to the question of are we ready for it? I would say yes and no. For those organizations who have already been practicing the global reporting frameworks and who have already established the processes and technology behind them, this is going to be a smoother transition than the others. So, but then, at the end of this year, when the first set of BRSR reports are going to come out, this is going to be a litmus test for regulators, investors, and the businesses. But then when I look at it, I would say that more than the intent of establishing BRSR right away, not waiting for the global frameworks to fall in place, is because starting sooner than later was more critical than getting it perfect on year 1. So that in next couple of years, we have a well-governed baseline in place onto which everyone can be onboarded. And then so that we have which helps us to establish sustainable business practices. And in the long run, we're all working towards a common national and global goal.
Absolutely. Like Santosh pointed out to what Martin said, right? There's no future here. There is no 5-year plan. We have to do it, and we have to do it now. And like Akanksha alluded to it in the earlier panel, it's not just corporates, it's all of us who are going to play our role in this. So Santosh, I now move to you to just check are there rating agencies for ESGs? And where is the interdependency between reporting formats and rating agencies? And are these agencies regulated?
Yeah, so I think, yes, there are rating agencies. And again, I would say that many of you would not have heard about these rating agencies before 2019. And they were already there, most of it. And they were, the so-called, being coming from a big four, I can say that we call the other specialized consulting as boutique consulting. Likewise, they were just boutique rating agencies. But what happened between 2019 and 20 is that the big players of the rating, they acquired all these boutiques. So you had the S&P acquiring Robeco Sams, or Moody's acquiring the Vigio Aries, and Morningstar into Sustainalytics. So I think all the big players of the ratings, they got into the ESG rating. And 2020 was significant when most of these rating agencies, they made their rating public. And so if you go out there and want to look at a particular Indian company, what is the ESG rating, you can see it now. So I think that public disclosure in 2020, that kind of changed many things as well. Sorry. So yes, the rating agencies, I don't think they are regulated as of now. I mean, they have their own ways of doing this rating. And again, we have seen the divergence between rating agencies quite significant. In the sense that I put out a correlation chart of the two ratings which has come in the last 3 months in India. We had two ESG rating agencies which has come up in India. And when I compare the NSE 100 companies in both these rating agencies and I put a correlation chart, I think the correlation was coming about 0.61 or something like that. So it's kind of, that's still better. But if you plot out some of the international rating agencies, it can be kind of absolutely different. I mean, in one rating agency, the company would be fantastic, and the other ESG rating, it would be very bad as well. So it can be as diverse as that. But each one of them would have a proper process, their own methodology, why, and they will stand by that rating. Why did they rate those companies like that? So I think that's, and they have their followers as well. I mean, there are investment agencies who look into these rating agencies. So there are a set of people who follow some of these methodologies, use those ratings as well. So I think, yes, we would see more ratings pop up. That can be expected, and there would be kind of more and more. The challenge in terms of the rating at present is the data on which they can do that rating, the data availability on ESG and the accuracy.
Accurate.
That's a bit of a challenge. And I can tell that, for example, what BRSR is trying to achieve is a kind of a comparability across data, because each companies earlier, when they were reporting on a particular parameter around ESG, they had their own definitions, and that makes them less comparable. So I think with more and more standards coming out, that would help in terms of improving the data quality and data availability, and that would help these rating agencies to do a better job. This is so
frightening and so strange that we are discussing ESG, and we are saying that the whole basis of this, if we move into reporting and rating, we are a little skeptical about the data itself. I mean, I think we all need to really pull up our socks. We have to get this fear out of the system by really doing what is right. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is going to be a challenge, and I'm sure everybody is quite aware of it. But I also see a huge opportunity here, a huge opportunity for, all these audits to take place, due diligence, rating. So there is going to come up this whole set of professionals who will now have to start working on this even more. So Tara, would you want to add anything to this point?
To the rating agency, I think that's going to be the very next step. The moment we have something that is globally comparable, then when the technology is going to add the trustworthiness of the process and data, it's going to be much easier to regulate the rating system. I think the initiatives have already started. IOSCA has just started their work towards how do we now bring all the rating agencies onto some kind of a correlation that we can do. When, as Santosh said, when the credit rating agencies, we get a correlation of 0.9 and then falls to 0.6. It's like we all have to run our own rating systems and understand the 700, 800 or attributes and see how you want to rate them and see.
You just have to work with purpose and spirit. Why should you depend on a rating agency for an ESG matter? Strange as it sounds. Santosh, I turn to you to talk a little about materiality. Every time we read about ESG, there's such a lot of talk about materiality and move towards double materiality. If you could shed some light on that, and Tara, please add to that as well. Santosh?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised when I first heard this term double materiality, to be very precise. Where did this come from? And, so because I in the very early stages of GRI and some of those kind of reporting standards, when they evolved, I was part of that. And there was only one way to look at materiality. And we said that, it is material if it impacts the company, if it is material if it impacts the stakeholders. That's it. There was only one way to look at materiality. Now, the terminology, when it came up, it kind of caught an interest in me, because I had never heard this terminology before, and why did it come up? And so I think then I kind of started correlating many things. And what has happened is that the rise of ESG and this term of double materiality is correlated. And so post 2018, you heard this double materiality come up, and that is mainly because of the ESG also. So, and even BRSR for that matter, if you really look at BRSR, it really seeks the company to list out what are the risks and opportunities for the company from the E&S space. It doesn't, talk about the E&S impacts the company causes. It very clearly says, identify those material issues and plot out what is the risk and opportunity for the company and give a financial implication of those risks. This is what BRSR is bringing out. So I think, and the reason there is the primary audience is the investor. I can understand that. So the primary audience is the investor. Even for example, an IR framework, people think that there was earlier, I think Professor Eccles brought out this book called One Reporting. And he said that one reporting combined, and that's the basis on which the whole IR came up. But IR very clearly right at the beginning itself says the primary audience is providers of financial capital. It very clearly puts it out, and many people forget to read that line. And see, the challenge is that many of these frameworks which we are looking into is developed with a primary audience of stakeholder in mind. And when you look at the investor as the primary stakeholder, this is something understandable, and you look at it from a risk and opportunity landscape. What is the impact on your financials? But if you look at from broader, what Martin said, in the broader frame of the whole of this ecosystem and the responsibility metrics of an enterprise and all those kind of things, then things change. What is your impact? Is it a significant impact you are causing? And then how are you? So I think if the earlier one, when you are only looking at how it impacts the company, is single materiality now. And now if you tend to look at it from both, how it impacts the company as well as how it impacts the stakeholder, and stakeholder can be the nature as well, is double materiality. So I think that is the difference between both these things. I feel that it is primarily coming from the rise of the ESG term, and the money started chasing many things and the investors' interest. So that's where the materiality discussions have kind of peaked.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Santosh. When I first heard about double materiality, I thought this is going to be a totally different concept. And then I could think of sustainability only in this way, both ways. How could it be only one? And then bring this coining in this term of double materiality, right? This was that's a fundamental to sustainability. Okay, so GRI and CDP are already based on double materiality. And thanks to BRSR, it has considered both sides. But then, as like many stakeholders must be wondering, I'm also starting to worry how IFRS and SSB is going to establish this, especially when they are talking about we are going to prioritize financially material sustainability topics first, and then the rest. And then they talk about the climate first and the climate plus. It's really starting to wonder what would get dropped between what is financially material and this climate plus. What all is going to get dropped is something that kind of we started thinking. And once this is done, and given the fact that it is going to take a long cycle to complete this, they should have just gone ahead and defined this framework fully out there so that it is available for everybody to get started on with it. The practices and preparations could start, whereas the adoption could be gradual. You could go with first financially material things and then go to the second, and the adoption could be gradual. But otherwise, didn't have to really differentiate is what I could think of. And especially because now we are talking about dynamic materiality. That's what is financially material today may not be financially material tomorrow. So what are you going to consider? And it could be that what is financially material to somebody need not be financially material to somebody else. So put it all out there, and then let's decide. Was that what I was thinking?
It's all fairness importance to all stakeholders. And
Right,
Tara,
true.
there are two of us from the Tata Group on the call. Even though you are an ex-Tata employee, I'm very tempted to share a quote of our founder, Mr. Jamshedji Tata, who way back then, about 150 years ago, in our own little way, I could call it double materiality, who reminded us that the community and the society is not just another stakeholder in business, but is in fact the very purpose of its business. So I haven't quoted it 100%, but this started so many years ago. So thank you very much. Some last closing lines from both of you. 30 seconds, please. We have a question from the audience, but if you could just share your thoughts and then I could get on to the question. Tara, to you.
Okay. Yeah. In spite of all this excitement and focus that we managed to get on to sustainability and ESG in the last couple of years, I found last 2 months particularly very exasperating. To start with, IPCC Sixth Amendment giving us one of the worst report card ever. And then we have started seeing the pictures of very first climate-induced famine. The pictures from Madagascar, where our fellow human beings are left to eat nothing but insects on one side of the world, right? And then keeping all this aside, throwing all this to trash, putting all those 250 scientists who have worked on this report and 14,000 research reports that have referenced, and those 200 odd countries who have agreed that this report makes sense, throwing all of them to trash, then we have on the other side some fossil fuel companies suing, trying to sue their government because they are hindering their journey to profit. And then we have world famous financial advisors telling the investors that ESG is a mistake, ESG investment is a mistake, right? It almost feels like, we have to go to war to fight climate change. Exactly like Haribhakti sir was highlighting in the beginning, the reason for his black tie. Not everybody is onboarded yet. This is it's so frustrating at times. So I would like to close with this quote, which was my favorite quote from the side. And for us, our kind of fight is going to be, the fight for better regulations, the leaders who are able to balance between profit and purpose, and disruptive technology, trustworthy data. These are the kind of fights that we can do. And for that, we need to bring the justice and power onto the same side. So I would say that justice and power must be brought together so that whatever is just may be powerful and whatever is powerful may be just.
Thank you for those great lines, Tara. Over to you, Santosh.
No, I think I kind of summarize it only one thing. I'll go back to the origins of the word company. It's an old French term called compagnie, which means society, friendship, or which came from the Latin word companio, one who eats bread with you. I think somewhere down the line, we have forgotten where the origins of the word company comes from.
Thank you for getting purpose back to the table. I'm going to do a quick rapid fire with you too before I take on the question. Santosh, Tara, let me start with you. Reporting, rating, governance, corporates and leaders should be regulation driven, or should they move now from compliance to consciousness?
I would go one step ahead, from consciousness to probably making it your competitive advantage.
Okay, thank you. Santosh, corporates are very busy making money or creating long-term value.
So I think I answered that when I answered it. There is nothing called long-term now. It's all now. I mean, you won't make money.
But we have to sustain. So we have to think long-term in any case.
Yeah, I think the so-called sustainability as a long-term risk is no more happening. It is here. It is impacting everybody. And I think
the future is now. Correct. Thank you. Tara, your advice for sustaining businesses, the focus should be quarter on quarter, year on year, or a decade.
All of the above, plus even more if your sustainability impacts is more complex.
Yeah. Like we saw the earth is burning types.
True.
Santosh, the most important E, environment, ethics, energy, or evolution?
Should I go with E for everything?
Thank you. That was very good. And E for excellent to both of you as well. Thank you very much for your thoughts, and they were so learned. And thank you for sharing your experiences as well. And a big thank you to Akanksha and Jessica also. If you could put your cameras on. And if there are any questions from the audience, we'll take them. I saw one question, which is about how is the ESG rating scenario in India evolving? Would one of you like to take it? Akanksha and Desika, you can get your cameras on. Thank you. Santosh, do you want to take that? I think you kind of addressed it, but
yeah, I think we already had 2 ratings coming up now in India. You'll see more, and which is in the pipeline. And more Indian companies are getting rated by the international ratings also. I have seen MSCI increase their number of companies they are rating. S&P has increased the number of Indian companies they are rating. So I think the international ratings are increasing the ratings for the Indian companies. Not increasing the ratings, I mean increasing the universe of the Indian companies in the rating, as well as the more ratings in India will also emerge.
thank you for that. The next question is, how has the pandemic affected the ESG reporting? Did you really see an impact on that? Anyone would like to answer it?
I wouldn't say it is particularly to reporting, but overall sustainability, yes. The pandemic and the millennial push has taken it beyond what we can think of. Already we had the goals of SDGs and Paris Agreement and net zero by 2050, and then 2050, and then these two had literally pushed it up.
Okay, thank you very much. We are running out of time, so I'm sorry, I have to stop the questions as well. So it's been a very interesting panel to moderate. All 4 of you have been so learned with your thoughts and so easy with your answers as well. So it's been a pleasure being on the call and sharing the stage with you. I thank Shailesh Bhai and Robin once again for this very great summit, and I wish the summit a lot of success. We all know that companies that apply and put ESG at center stage will benefit. They will benefit from attracting the right resources, the increased profitability, probably higher valuations, a much better market share, and longevity in business. And above all, they will have the satisfaction that businesses have been grown with a purpose to protect and nurture the environment and in turn the world. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure coordinating this with all of you. And let's all pledge to work and remain below 1.5 degrees centigrade. Thank you very much. And I hand you back to Naina. Thank you. And thanks very much, everyone, once again.
I just want to make one intervention, Kashmira. You really rocked it. It was just a fantastic set of Socratic dialogues. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Everyone on the involved in the dialogue was extraordinary. So my compliments to all of you. I just want to leave one thought with everybody. Let's think of gross zero. Forget about net zero. We should not do anything, not commit to any investment which is likely to create a further carbon footprint. And maybe we won't be able to do it today, but in 5 years from today, I think we can get there.
But we'll think about it today and we start practice today. Thank you very much. Thank you. Over to you, Naina.
Thank you, Ms. Mirawala. We shall now move on to the next session, which is the panel discussion on good governance and social responsibility business implications. Before I invite the moderator to begin this panel discussion, I would just like to inform the participants that the Q&A button is right on the top right corner. So you just have to click there to send in your questions. May I now invite our moderator for this panel discussion, Mr. Robin Banerjee, who is the co-chairman of CII ESG Western Region Sub-committee and also the managing director of Capricorns India Limited. Over to you, Mr. Banerjee.
Thank you, Naina. Since last 2 hours, 1.5 hours, I have been listening to some exquisite and wonderful exposition of what ESG has already started doing to the business community. So ladies and gentlemen, we have now a panel discussion. May I request my panelists, 4 of them, to kindly switch on their cameras so that we are all together. And Neeraj Basur, I can see already there. Neeraj, thank you. Neeraj is the CFO, Chief Financial Officer of Blue Star Limited. I can see Una. Una, hi, thank you, being there. Una Di Mello, who is the co-founder and CEO of My Sustain Online. So thank you, Una, for being here with us. Rajendra, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, excellent, Rajendra. Could you switch on your camera if you don't mind?
It's on. It's
yes. Can I see you? Yes, yes, you are right. Thank you, Rajendra. Rajendra Chopra, Company Secretary, Cipla Limited. Who doesn't know your company, Rajendra? Everyone does. And then Ram Vaidyanathan. Ram was there, I could see. Yes, hi, Ram.
Hi. Good evening,
Ram
everyone.
Vaidyanathan, Head Environmental Sustainability Godrej Group. Again, who doesn't know this company? In fact, who doesn't know the companies which are being represented here? We have the finest speakers. And we have about together maybe 45 minutes because 15 minutes have been eaten away by the earlier one, but that's okay. That's on a lighter note. Our topic now, it's a panel discussion. And our topic essentially is good governance and social responsibility, which is the G and S of the ESG. But the most important is business implications for all this. We all know that unless it makes a business sense, nothing works. We can talk, but unless there is a business sense, things wouldn't move the way or the speed at which we would like to have. Since the last 1.5 hours or so, a lot of discussions have happened on me. Of course, some splattering of S and G has also happened, but now we shall focus on the G and S of our ESG topic. The way I would like to structure it, ladies and gentlemen, if you all agree, may I request my panelists, 4 of you, and I will call out the names one after another, to kindly spend about 3 to 4 minutes as to what is your take on the topic of good governance and social responsibility, more importantly, the business implications of it. One sentence I want to state on this for everyone here, that when we did our studies, we always talked about, and when we looked finance and we did study business, we were talked about shareholder value. That means we have to enhance shareholder value. Slowly, the shareholder value became stakeholder value, thankfully. Shareholder is not the only value chain, it is a stakeholder, which includes employees, government, vendors, customers, everybody. And now what's coming out is the ESG value, such a shift. I don't think we would have discussed before 2018 ESG value. But today we are saying, is there big business implications for having an ESG, especially the G and S side of the story? Good. So if you all agree, we'll spend about 3 to 4 minutes if you can, time yourselves, and then we will have some questions amongst ourselves, and then we'll throw it to the open because I'm quite sure there will be quite a bit of questions from our listeners today. So Neeraj, if I could go to you first. Neeraj, what are your thoughts about this topic, which is very, very topical as of now? Go ahead, Neeraj.
Thank you very much, Robin. First of all, thanks to you and thanks to Mr. Haribhakti for setting this entire very interesting session up last 1.5 hours. And it's a pleasure and a privilege from my perspective to be here. Robin, as you rightly said, the G of ESG is indeed a very critical element and a pillar to really focus sharply on in order to have a holistic perspective on ESG. So I just like to spend a couple of minutes on why focus on governance. Why focus on governance? Not just because the regulator wants us to focus on governance or because stakeholders are asking for it. First and foremost, over the last decade or so, the digitization footprint has grown manifold across elements of every business and our economies at large. Now, that's a big shift that's happened. Now, access to information, data, and insights is far more reliable, timely, and accurate than it used to be probably a couple of decades ago. Revenue authorities and government departments are far more interconnected and can easily track, trace, and establish transactional linkages than probably what they were able to do a few years ago. Bankers, investors, customers, suppliers, employees, everyone can access rich data insights and frame their decisions and choices around business relationships that they choose to forge or not choose to forge at all. Therefore, governance focus has now become an inevitability and is no longer a good to have focus area. The size and the status and the stature of the entity does not matter anymore. in the context of good governance. And this governance focus, in my view, is no longer an imperative for the listed or regulated entities in India. And I'm making this comment more from the perspective of small, medium, and micro enterprises. So that's how I see why governance is needed. A couple of quick minutes on what can be a good governance framework. Just a very quick perspective on that. It's a vast subject. Few pointers: board structure, the composition of board structure, role of independent directors, experience, competency, diversity, balance. Personally, I'd encourage SMEs to set up a board. Usually it may not come naturally, but then time has come to distinguish management and the board responsibilities at every entity level. Board committees, in particular, having the board committees having a good charter that fulfills the responsibility. Audit, risk, nomination, remuneration committee, very critical elements of board responsibility delivery. The interplay of role between the board and the management teams, and how the two sets of stakeholders engage and demonstrate a collective vision towards the long-term governance responsibility. There are some key entity level policies which, in my view, every entity must have. Big, small, large, doesn't really matter. Starts with the code of conduct. The tone needs to be set at the top. How related party transactions, related party relationships need to be governed, how related party elements need to be really managed in a very mature way. Having a very, very well established whistleblower mechanism, encouraging people to speak up. The entire POSH implications around governance, in all having a vigil mechanism, which kind of integrates audit, risk management, and financial controls, and the interplay between these. And last but not the least, before I close, Robin, very critical elements around governance are communication. How effectively are governance frameworks communicated within the organization and outside the organization, inside and outside in, and how effectively is governance effectiveness reviewed, and then those learnings incorporated as a constant process. So I'll end here and leave the floor to the rest of my colleagues. Thanks a lot, Robin, for allowing me.
Thank you so very much. You really focused on G, the governance space. Thank you so much. I loved your ideas on whistleblower and vigil mechanism, and of course the communication bit of it. So this, I will raise one or two questions, of course, on this to get some more clarity. But thank you. This was absolutely brilliant. Una, if I may kindly move to you. You perhaps will now look at S because G has been now focused already. So now over to you for your comments, please.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'd like to start by sort of setting the stage from the perspective of S to say we're all here today to initiate change. And if we can take a moment to talk about the idea of change and whether it is approached with intentionality or it is something that happens mostly organically. When we're looking at ESG goals, before we talk implementation and policy, we might be missing a step. And the step is the human mindset. The human mindset, being an influencer, has an impact on cultures that are unfortunately most often created without intentionality. And this might be provocative of me to say, but my belief is that we found ourselves in a situation today where we've evolved as a planet largely through the absence of intentionality. And the reason I bring this up is because we are the drivers of change, and the impact is on the environment. The environment is responding to us positively or negatively, and climate change is a result of our human behaviors, be it consumerism or human greed. Business is a platform of that change, and leadership in business holds the power and the influence that can initiate change at scale. So organizations are a very interesting cross-section of society. Regardless of size, they have the potential to be socially responsible and to initiate change. This ability and this responsibility that organizations have to transform begins within the workplace. However, and interestingly, the transformation holds influence that is much greater than the workplace itself. The drive, and so to sort of drive it all together, business is a platform or an ecosystem or a container driven by intentional minds within leaders, as well as across the ecosystem. Only when we acknowledge the entirety of our ecosystem can we make room for sustainable change. Of course, we can't leave governance out of it, as everyone has mentioned as well, is because whatever we plan and track has the potential to be studied, replicated, scaled, reported, and shared as best practices and benchmarks. Coming back for a quick moment to focus on mindsets, and that it is a key factor in change of any kind and on any level. We know that mindsets result in behaviors. That's the output. Most behaviors are learned. I could say that all behaviors are learned, but I'm holding a small margin for most. If empathy can be a learned behavior, then why is it that we haven't focused on cause and effect in how we live, and the choices we make, and the business decisions we execute, and what we consume, etc.? This lack of intentionality around the impact of our choices and our behaviors on the planet has already brought about great damage, which Martin has shown us so very clearly. My invitation is that we undertake at the level of the system, be it an organization, institution, or country, learning as a strategic next step to initiate, and at the very least to put a stop to where we are before we cause further damage. It is quite often a myth that change takes place at only one layer within leadership. The myth in itself is unsustainable. An expression I use often to describe change that only takes place at one layer is lack of sustained change initiative. Change in itself is multidimensional, is interdependent, is interrelated as an approach, and it is sustainable only if it is pivoted by purpose. So let's not forget that sustainability is an expression of our everyday choices that allow for stable ecosystems, be it individual, community, organizational, institutional, or even at the level of country and planet. And to reinstate, the invitation is that leadership inspire through vision and educate for purpose. Educating at any one level with the expectation that it will influence the entire ecosystem is a fallacy. Unfortunately, we have tampered with the environmental ecosystem to such an extent that we are now at the tipping point of crisis, and every little next step can either help or make things worse. What I'm alluding to, and what all of the esteemed speakers today have alluded to as well, and some said very directly, is that we need all. And while I make a case for sustainability education, which in itself invites the entire spectrum and people at all levels, stages, and layers, the invitation for leaders is to participate as individuals and yet leverage their role to create a larger impact. The point thus is that sustainability learning is imperative. And lastly, to conclude, we often speak of sustainability from the perspective of environmental and economic sustainability. The call today is to engage, my call today is to engage with human behaviors and with mental models and mindsets so that we can further environmental and economic sustainability goals by influencing social systems. Sustainable systems that allow for sustainability to be effected on scale. I'd like to close by sharing a quote by someone very near and dear to me, Preeti DeMello. She's the Global Head of Diversity and the Lead Academy at TCS. We show up as we are. Change yourself to change the world. Our mind is the starting point of our reality. Thank you.
Una, wonderful what you said. Two words really has sticking to me. Change is what, of course, you said. One, of course, change. We need to change the climate. We need to reverse the cycle for sure. That's one change. Another is attitude. The mindset is what you said. We need to change. We have to make a change. Thank you so much. I completely agree. Climate and attitude. Unless we change these two stuffs, God knows we are running out of time for sure. Thank you, Una. Brilliant. Thank you, Neera. Thank you, Una. I think we are having wonderful discussions. I wish we had the whole night today to debate and discuss, but unfortunately we have a few minutes. Thank you. Rajendra, now it's over to you, sir. Cipla, because you are the pharmaceutical, you live by having some of your medicines. So Mr. Rajendra Chopra. Rajendra, over to you, sir.
Yes. So I'll touch upon the point on S, which is the middle pillar in the ESG. If we look at S in the ESG, it is a very important and foundational pillar in the ESG. Historically, if you look, corporates were existing only for the purpose of making profit. They were more accountable to the shareholders of the company. Gradually, the things changed. We started contributing to the society because we started believing that it is the society due to which the business exists. But when you look at the S, which is a important pillar of the CSR, it is much wider than the shareholder and the society. It includes every constituent or external stakeholder who engage with the company. It includes our suppliers, it includes our vendors, it includes the entire supply chain system. If suppose we are in the healthcare industry, so it includes the healthcare professional, it includes the patients, it includes the stockists, whatnot. Every aspect of the society or constituent of the society who engage with the company is a part of the social pillar. But unfortunately, if you look at the S part, it is mostly conceived to be limited to the shareholder or society and at the most on the employees. Literally, if you see, S is treated as a second child, ignored and neglected. Organization, stakeholders, regulators, activists, whosoever you speak to, will focus more on the E part and then the G part. Somewhere in the process, the S will get ignored. There are comprehensive framework around, I would say, environment. There are tangible metrics to evaluate the environmental aspect, the emissions, the energy, water, and waste management system. There are tangible metrics around the governance aspect, and as Neeraj explained, there are multiple parameters on which a company can be evaluated on how the governance standard of a corporation is. But if you look at the social pillar, the definition itself is vague. The parameters are very subjective, even though there are certain guidelines, but still this is very vague, and there are no common platform or common parameter on the basis of which the companies can be evaluated. Likewise, different people have different understanding of the same concept. And because there is so much of the awareness and emphasis, and rightfully so, on the environment, that people consciously decide to choose to report and explain more about or focus more on the environmental aspect rather than on the social aspect. Just to give an example, I was going through some of the annual reports and other public documents of some of the companies, and we realized that even the companies who are in financial service sector or maybe in the IT sector, they are taking net zero, water neutrality, zero land waste to landfill, etc. as the target. Yes, of course, I'm not saying that they should not take this target, but is it very relevant for them? Or there can be some other target or parameter which they should take to serve the society in a more meaningful way. Let me give you an example. Cipla is a pharmaceutical company. Of course, we also have the target to protect the environment and to the business and address the issues around E, which is environmental issues. But what we do is we are the company who serve the largest societal interest and purpose, which is providing access to the medicines, quality medicines at an affordable price. Cipla and our product are directly consumed by the patients or the consumer, which has direct impact on the health and life expectancy of the people. And therefore, it is more important for me to provide access to the medicines and at an affordable price, and to ensure that the medicines are quality medicine rather than giving overweightage to the environment. So we need to see that the social angle is equally important and is given due care in comparison to environment in certain sectors. Yes, of course, we have to be sensitive to the environmental aspect, but we have to ensure that at the same time, we are responsible and we are contributing to the larger purpose for which the companies have been assigned a duty by the society and for which they exist in the society. There are around 2 billion people in the world who do not have a regular access or assured access to the essential medicines. We have taken a pledge. The company CIPLA has taken a pledge, and today, today we supply medicines which give access to roughly 45% of the essential medicines as per the WHO. So this is how we try to contribute to the society. And those who watch the KBC, they must have seen recently a question by Amitabh Bachchan in one of the KBC, where they said that CIPLA is God and Dr. Y.K. Hamid CIPLA is a temple and Dr. Y.K. Hamid is the God in Africa. Why did it happen? Why did this question was raised? Because at a time in 2000-2001, when Africa was struggling with the pandemic of HIV, and on an average, 1 year course or a drug, antiretroviral drug, was costing to the people there at $10,000 to $15,000 to $15,000 a year. CIPLA provided the same medicine to the society, to African countries at $350 a year. Look at the difference. And this is how I believe some of the organizations should make difference in the world. I think if we are sensitive to the purpose for which we exist, while remaining sensitive to the environment and governance aspect, it will be more meaningful service and it will be more meaningful contribution to the ESG aspect. I'll stop here and we'll wait.
Thank you, Rajendra. I'm so happy that you focused on the S, the society. It's true that we talk a lot on environment, which is the E, and of course there's a lot of talk on G. But the middle of it, the society for which the E and G exists, is often forgotten. And we are so happy to see the way your organization is contributing its bit towards the S. Well, thank you. I'm sure that already there's a lot of questions have started pouring in. So we are running out of time. But Ram, there is always a disadvantage when you speak the last, that the moderator will push you for time, but you have the advantage to say something which you always wanted to say, but now you have the time. Go ahead, Ram. Over to you.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think none of the previous speakers actually, everything they said was impactful. So I think it was a great utilization of time in any case. So I will try and, in purely like how we talk in energy efficiency terms per word, I'll try and make more impact as much as possible. I think some very, very important points that we have already been discussed. I'm going to reiterate some of them and bring up some new thoughts that I had. From the idea of ESG as an overall principle, I think a very, very important thing that was discussed earlier by Neeraj, as well as Una, I think, mentioned this, is how do you change thinking? And this is where governance really comes into play. That's, I think, a very, very critical aspect of this. Because one of the questions that I got asked at a conference, the World Business Council conference, was, if all of you companies say you're doing so well on your environmental and social and all these parameters, then how come the overall needle is not being moved? I thought that was a very, very important question, because at sometimes we tend to be very inward looking in terms of how well we're doing within the boundaries of our operations, within the scope of work that we have, our manufacturing facilities, our offices, our social policies, our HR policies. But I think what we really need to see is that to really move the needle, I think it's time, especially for India Inc., to start looking outside the fence, beyond our own operation, beyond our own sphere of influence. And I think one of the major and most critical things, which I'll be very honest with you, doesn't have any easy answers, is how do we influence and raise the entire level of the entire supply chain, all the way from the source as well as to the consumption. Now, we talk about marketing as a way of influencing consumers. I don't think many companies have a very good idea of how to bring sustainability into that communication, that marketing communication. Because while we can create the greenest products, while we can reduce the impact of the products in our value chains, how do we make sure they're being consumed and then disposed of in an efficient manner, in the proper manner? How do we communicate that to the consumers? in a very, very strange sense, I would say the real estate sector is actually one of the most forward-thinking ones in this, because not only do they have very clear, green product communication in terms of a platinum building, gold building, silver building. It's very clear. I mean, what you're buying for is a greener product. They also have, a clear instructions on how to utilize that. Now, for example, if you have the greenest building available and if you have natural ventilation, they encourage you to use less air conditioning. So that is in a way you're influencing the consumer on how to use that product more sustainably. So I think that aspect of communicating and influencing is something we need to focus on a lot more, because I think it's any improvements we make right now in the environmental and the social impact that we're having, it'll be only incremental unless we look at the entire supply chain. I think we have to look at the entire supply chain. We need to raise the floor. We keep talking about, oh, I can do this, but I can't influence my vendors, I can't influence the suppliers. But I think as industry, if we get together and do this and adopt a more of a carrot and a stick approach to begin with. What I mean is that, you don't necessarily penalize bad behavior, but reward good behavior, at least to begin with. And that's a great way to, to get things started. And that's how the EU was able to, really over a decade, they really have very stringent standards for sustainability. On the social aspect, I think one very, very important thing that we have to understand is India is one of the few places where social impact is measured in very divergent ways. One way is obviously we have one of the few countries which have CSR laws, which says that a certain percentage of your profits need to be spent on social outcomes, on improving social outcomes. Now, do you view success as spending that 2% to make sure that you don't have any lapse in spending that, or do you measure it in terms of the impact that the 2% is creating? I think we're still too focused on the first part of it, which is compliance. And I think compliance is only one part of sustainability. In fact, I make it a point at all of our sustainability committee meetings at Godrej to say that anything with compliance, be it CSR, be it even EPR regulations for waste management, compliance should not be a part of sustainability. You're only doing the bare minimum by fulfilling regulations. Your real impact as sustainability professionals should be in the input. How do you measure outcomes and impacts? So I think we need to start focusing on that. And this is where, just to tie it up very quickly, governance is very, very important. When you start putting sustainability through the entire organization rather than just a function, it sits in the ESG function or the CSO's function, so to say. I think when you start making right from the board accountable for not just setting targets and achieving them, and also for setting long-term strategies, you really see an acceleration in terms of the ESG principles. Very simply, so at Godrej, we've created a board-level sustainability committee now. And now, cascading from that, all the senior management now have sustainability goals as part of their KRAs. Now, we have already seen a massive shift in the momentum in that. So you can see a huge amount of conversations happening at the board level, which then influences not just the manufacturing, but the legal teams, the marketing teams, the product teams, the innovation teams, the audit teams on how do we audit social and environmental impact projects. So I think, and this is where some Asian companies, I would say, or at least Indian companies do struggle a bit, because by Western standards of governance, we do have a lot more, say, family-owned businesses or very traditional business structures, which are not the same. So we do sometimes get trapped in that structure. But I think it's very important as forward-thinking companies to break out of that, to have very transparent governance, and to have accountability running right the way through the organization, not just with the operations people, but right from the directors all the way down to the marketing, sales, everyone. Because sustainability at the end of the day is business is thriving. It's not just about surviving.
Ram, thank you. You really brought a fantastic side of the story. Not only we should look at the whole supply chain or the value chain sustainability, but what about the end, which is the consumption bit of it? Unless the whole chain from the start to the finish is attacked and we are sustainable, the world will be a loser. And as we have been talking for the last few hours, that we have run out of time. We are actually run out of time. What I will now do, ladies and gentlemen, Una and Neeraj and Rajendra, Ram, if you agree, we've already started getting questions from the participants. So I will now mix the questions so that we can save time. We are already almost beyond time. One question, which perhaps Neeraj, maybe I would like to ask you, that the question just come from the viewers today, is that unlike E and S, can we have a KPI around G? And can it be managed in a better way? Can G be made a KPI? E and S, we talk about it for sure. But G, I think the listener or the participant today does feel that we are perhaps do not have enough KPIs around G. So Neeraj, any views on that? It's a difficult one, but I think interesting one also.
Very interesting one, Robin, indeed. Yes, of course, we, like Ram said, I think it's very important to focus on the outcome and not just the input that we are giving in each of these elements. Of course, we should come up with KPIs on the G. For example, if we talk about a well-governed company or a well-governed entity, what do the employees think about that company in terms of their retention rates, the attrition rates? What do the bankers and the investors think about that company in terms of their willingness to lend money? Firstly, lend, and secondly, lend money at a very competitive structure. How do suppliers, how do government entities interact in terms of the number of interactions by way of demands, notices, and so on. So those KPIs can be easily thought through, because a company that's focused, an entity focused on governance measures, will surely see, finally the impact will be seen in the strategic outcomes. That's the ultimate KPI, that the strategic outcomes measurable, whether it is in terms of growth, whether it is in terms of profits, whether it is in terms of shareholder valuation. Those KPIs are certainly measurable, and linkages are drawn. And that's what at least I have experienced across several organizations.
Very well said. Rajendra, in fact, again, I'm taking a question from what has already come. The role of the auditors. Now, let's say there is a company secretarial audit on governance. There is a governance report and you are a company secretary yourself. Now, do you think there is a scope now the auditors will now sign up on ESG? How do you foresee that? And Ram, I would also like you to spend a few sentences on this. The auditor's role on ESG. Already there is a governance audit, ESG audit. Rajendra first. Just a short answer because we are running out of time.
Yes. So,
and there are several questions we have, by the way.
Yeah. So I'll split the governance in two parts. One is the corporate governance, which is more regulated by SEBI and, Ministry of Corporate Affairs. There, the statutory auditor, the secretarial auditor, and, internal auditor have a regular oversight. There are statutory filing and there are certification and audit report, which you submit to the investors, to the shareholder, to the stock exchanges, regulator, etc. There's another aspect of the governance, which is beyond shareholder. And as I said, different stakeholder. What is my governance around my suppliers, my vendors, my employees? And there, if you see, under GRI framework, companies who publish the integrated report or sustainability report, they do have an assurance report from the assurance partner. And these are data which are validated, the reports are published, and these are submitted with the approval of the board to the shareholder and to the stakeholder for consumption. So there are already systems in place for the external validation of the information which are submitted to the stakeholders. Excellent. Did it answer the question?
Absolutely perfect. I think you stated very well. Ram, what's your take on this? Essentially speaking, when you mention that let's reward good behavior and not start penalizing bad behavior, not negative way of handling, but positive way of handling. So this whole issue of auditing, certification, ESG, and we of course talked about rating agencies a little earlier. So quick take on this, Ram. What do you think is the way forward? What's going to happen?
From personal experience itself, I think one of the biggest learnings has been the importance of external disclosures and transparency. I think that's absolutely critical. For most ESG parameters, I think you have very well-defined global indices, which are very trustworthy, which have a lot of cachet in the industry. So you just take something like CDP, for example. It's a globally recognized index, which has become so robust that investors are getting their cues from the CDP results now. So many investors, if you look at the Morgan Stanley index or the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, they take their cues from the reporting that happens in CDP. And this is especially critical. I'm just linking to the first thing I said, which is about, if all of you are doing good work, it's not just enough to do good work. It's enough for it. It's also important for it to be validated externally by a very standard measure. You cannot have individual ways of representing performance, because there's a tendency there to sort of, downplay some of the challenges and, try to sort of brush it under the carpet, not deliberately, but, there's just a natural tendency to speak about things that you do better in general. But if you have a standard template, a standard way of, ranking companies or, giving companies, it's not a lot of people assume, these sort of indices just to be an indication of your performance, but they also give you a good indicator of what should you do next. It's a great guiding light for you. So the more important thing for me, rather than the score on the index, is the meeting that happens after that to discuss it and say, this is what you need to do going forward. I think that is absolutely critical. I think it's very, very important for companies not to worry so much about, a lot of people hesitate to take the first step in disclosure because they're like, what if I get a bad score? Nobody gets a great score, first off. It's perfectly all right. But you'd be surprised at the number of simple things that the disclosures point to, which you can do, which can improve your ESG performance, which you do not see just because you're not disclosing all this information. I always say, perfect is the enemy of good. And we keep waiting for us to get to the perfect situation before we reveal performance. But but the movement doesn't happen. The momentum doesn't happen. So 80% of all the good work in ESG can happen with very little effort. But you need to know what to work on. And that's where transparent disclosure really, really play an important part. And one very important thing, Robin, you mentioned about audit. I just want to highlight the aspect of risk. At the end of the day, ESG is risk. And the whole point about doing audits and making ESG a stronger part of this audit is de-risking yourself. So it just completely makes business sense. I don't think there's it's a no-brainer for me, for most companies.
Excellent. That really sums up. Una, I'm coming to you, but before that, Ram, you made a very, very valid comment of forget about the past, let's look at the future. And if future is good, automatically the business implications are positive. So Una, I know the questions are being asked is, can you teach sustainability? Is it something teachable, learnable? Because we have all said a lot of things, but how do we change this whole society? And that's what you talked about, the attitude, and of course the climate needs to change. So Una, over to you. People want to know more about it, little but fast, and we have run out of time. Thank you.
Absolutely, Robin, absolutely. Well, I think like all systems, organizations are also dynamic containers of interaction, dialogue, relationships. To this, we add an overlay of culture, which is the organizational culture, which in effect speaks to our lifestyle, the use of language, utilization of resources, and personal consumer trends as well. But sustainability ought to be a part of the organizational vision. It ought to be a part of board agenda, leadership goals, and it ought to be governed, measured, and reported. This showcases the commitment to a cause and builds an environment of collective buy-in. If we don't know what we are working towards, and if it is simply a mandate that is passed down, then you have not created enough of a value proposition so that people are truly understanding the value of change. Because as I had mentioned earlier, is that even though change is taking place within the workplace, the benefits of that change will be seen not only within, but will have the potential to percolate far beyond and outside of the workplace as well, hence greater impact.
Thank you, very well said. The fact that we have now run out of time, the way I would like to quickly request all of you to perhaps say one thing, all of you, one by one, that you would like to see a change. Because ESG is a change. 2017-18, we were not talking ESG. Today, which is fantastic, 2021, we are talking ESG. And we are having our first CII seminar today on ESG. I don't think we would have ever thought of having an ESG seminar 1 year back. Who the hell would come and spend 2 hours, 3 hours on it? But today, we have a full house. In fact, we have a lot of people who are watching this on YouTube, just for information, ladies and gentlemen. So having said that, would you kindly, and I will start with Una, always women first, because you are the society actually, to my mind. You have created all of us. What is it that one thing you want to see to change in ESG? And then I'll go around the table, Neeraj, Ram, and Rajendra, perhaps that way. Go ahead, Una.
Thanks, Robin. I would say in equal measure to pay attention to all aspects of sustainability, which includes not only environmental and economical, but also to human and social. And human and social are also different from one another. And just to say that the interconnectedness of all living things is integral. And the treatment of all with equal care is what creates change. And to the point made earlier, it not only then creates a thriving ecosystem, but allows for a flourishing one for people, purpose, planet, and profit. So in equal measure.
Wonderful, Una, you just said it. I don't know what others are going to say because you said it all. Thank you, Una. Very well said. Neeraj, what would make it want to change?
Yes, for me, the one big change I would like to see is this entire ESG or sustainability agenda becoming more voluntary and voluntarily complied rather than becoming a regulatory agenda from a compliance point of view. And I think that will really move the needle.
Love it, love it. Una talks about totality, ESG, all three important. Neeraj talks about make it voluntary. It is our world, not somebody else's world. It's excellent. Ram, I don't know what you will now say. Go on, Ram.
A tough couple of acts to follow, but I'll just very simply, I think carbon, waste, water, none of these have boundaries. These boundaries we only have imagining in our head. Climate change affects, you can't, there's no good saying, my country is doing well on climate change, or my country. Climate flows without boundaries, water flows without boundaries. So I think we need to remove all these boundaries, shed our egos, collaborate, work together because we're all in the same boat. So collaborate and be bold. And this is a decade of action. Enough of making commitments. Time to take action and time to demonstrably show results with that action.
Super, you said boundaryless, because this is boundaryless. Air flows everywhere, water flows everywhere, and nobody has ownership of anything of this sort. Sun is everywhere, the light is everywhere. Wonderful, wonderful what you said. Brilliant. Now, Rajendra, we are really looking forward to what you are going to say. Rajendra, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah. No, Rajendra, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. No, we can't hear you. Naina, CII, can you office help him, please?
Sure.
I think it's a microphone issue because there's a bit of static coming there.
Yeah.
There is some problem.
I have unmuted myself.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. I was unmuted, but somehow the voice was not reaching. I think all the co-panelists has already said what needed to be said. And taking forward from Ram's statement of boundaryless, I would recommend, and just to supplement, the organizations and corporates have already started walking the talk. They have already started working on this. We need to give some time to them to come to speed. We have to be regulator, activist, society, everybody has to be little tolerant and give time, encourage the corporates to do right. They will continue to do that. I would encourage to do what is right for the society rather than getting, in the complex web of regulations, metrics, parameters, rating agency, etc. First, do what is right for the society, for the corporate, or for the organization, and everything will fall in place. If we try to react to different regulations, different parameters, today X agency is asking me to disclose something, I'll start disclosing it. Now, tomorrow, Y agency start asking me for something different and I start reporting them. That will not take us anywhere. I think do what is right for the organization, what is best in the interest of the society, and we will definitely reach to the best place. That is my
excellent, Rajendra. Absolutely correct. Let's start doing right rather than now thinking who is right, who is wrong, who is saying what is to be done. Let us do it ourselves because after all, it's our society. Ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't be more happier than this. This was one of the most fantastic, I must say, session I've had. Of course, Shailesh Bhai is watching. I would like to hear what he wants to say, but this is amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, all of you were absolutely winners. Superb comments. I hope people have heard it. I hope as a society, as CII, we can take parts of it and make a change to the society and to the world. Because as we are always already saying, time has run out. Time is not running out. Time has run out. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, everyone. Shailesh Bhai, over to you first, and then Naina can take
Well, Robin, you just did a masterful act of bringing this amazing panel together. Una, Neeraj, Ram, and Rajendra, you all were just spectacular. I'm so delighted. The outcome of this session to me is just one word: boundaryless collaboration. Thank you. This was a phenomenal session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, all of you. I really agree. It was absolutely outstanding, stunning, and completely boundaryless. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Naina,
lovely.
Thank you, sir. We will now move on to our last session, which is the valedictory session. And may I now invite Mr. Gil Friend, CEO, Natural Logic, and co-founder MySystem Online, to address the delegates on call for action. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Naina. Hello, everybody. It's just before dawn here in California. I have not been able to be in the whole conference with you because personal sustainability required some sleep. But I very much like what I've heard in the last half hour. And the theme of boundaryless collaboration is one that I think is in the background of everything we're talking about here. Thank you for inviting me to share a perspective of some 30 years, excuse me, in this realm that we now call ESG. I hope I can add something valuable to what you've all been discussing all day. I'm going to make 4 points. First, that we are at the end of an epoch in human history and on the verge of a new one. Second, the code red alarm that we've heard from the United Nations is real, but it's just the tip of the iceberg of the challenges that we face as humanity in the world now. Third, the business risk of ESG, I think, is often misconstrued, and we'll talk about that. And fourth, there's a critical path for business to thrive in service to the living world and for India to lead in this new world that's emerging. So first, the end of an age. Nearly 40 years ago, Sheikh Zaki Yamani, who was the foreign minister of OPEC, said that the oil age will end, not because we run out of oil, any more than the Stone Age ended because we ran out of stones. Well, that was prophetic, and here we are now at the end of the fossil fuel age. That's clear to everyone, perhaps not as clear to the companies in that business, but that's a big challenge. We're at the end of the post-war, post-World War II economic order. We're at the end of norms and expectations that we have come to take for granted in the last 70 to 100 years that are spinning around us, turning over into a new world. The Italian revolutionary Antonio Gramsci said 100 years ago, said that we're in the time, it said that the old world is dying and the new world has not yet been born. This is the time of monsters. And excuse me, monsters in mythology, of course, are both horrible and terrifying creatures, but they're also primal generative forces of something new. So here we are at the end of an age with the opportunity to be victims or shapers of the next age. The Code Red report has grabbed attention from around the world. It's a call for all hands on deck, not just the leaders that we've known as leaders, but everybody to engage on this issue. We even see the language changing before our eyes. So we talked about global warming and then climate change and then climate crisis and then climate emergency, and scientists are now talking about the possibility of climate collapse. That should be strong enough to get all of our attention, but the challenge is worse. The stack is deeper, not just climate, but not just the COVID pandemic, but the possibility of a pandemic era. The ongoing damage to life in the oceans, the destruction of biodiversity around the planet. Here in the United States, maybe worldwide, we've lost 70% of insect species. Rising desertification, more than 40% of the land surface of the earth now denuded of vegetation. The challenge of democracy, the challenge of millions and perhaps tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people on the move in response to climate disruption. And it's worse than that. The report card just issued by one of the climate organizations ranking national performance against the Paris commitments is deeply discouraging. Dozens of companies in the completely unacceptable category, dozens of companies, countries, I'm sad to say, including India and China, at the generally inadequate response. a dozen countries, including the United States, at the somewhat inadequate response. Only one considered adequate in response to Paris commitments. That's Gambia in Africa. So goals are good or potentially useful, but performance is where it really matters. So beneath the challenge of the climate is the challenge of the soils and water of this planet, the challenge of revegetating and rewilding the living world to which we belong, and in fact, recognizing that we belong to a living world, not just something for us to manage better, but to belong to as living beings on a living planet. Third, we're in a time of prophets. We look at modern prophets. They've been people who've spent years or decades in prison. I think of Nelson Mandela in Africa, Martin Luther King here in the United States. Gandhi, certainly a prophet in our last century. Today, the prophets are in high school. Greta Thunberg, who has woken the world with her just unvarnished, straight ahead truth about what we face. I wouldn't call myself a prophet, but I've been a scout. And for the past 30 years, I've been running ahead of the tribe, running over the next hill to see what's there and coming back with a report of what might be ahead of us. And frankly, my reports and those of my colleagues have often been discounted. 30 years ago, we were laughed at, ridiculed for being not realistic. But now the things that we've been talking about are on the table in every boardroom on the planet. They're on the agenda in every cabinet chamber in the world. And so it's a very different context, a very different setting that we're living in. What I've seen from my scouting over these past decades is that there are billions of dollars of opportunity in value to be generated by companies that can look at their business not just through the financial statements, but through the ecological lens. The ecological lens of what we've learned from 4 billion years of research and development by Earth's living systems, research and development that is open source, available to all. Just a few principles that we know from that is that the planet runs on income energy, on solar energy, and living systems live on ambient resources, the sun and the wind and the rain that land on that piece of land. We know that systems are circular. There is no waste. The waste of one organism is the food of the next. We are a long way from that, but it's a direction we can move in. We see in living systems that there are no persistent toxic materials. Toxic materials are synthesized briefly when needed and dissociated, not stored and managed as we do in our so-called advanced societies. And we see hierarchies, if you will, that are flat, not stacked. We see pervasive coordination at horizontal levels throughout living systems. So those are some of the guides that we need to attend to as we move forward. Let me use the word profit in another sense, P-R-O-F-I-T. There's resistance among many to the ESG imperative. Some of that is out of fear of it costing profit, that doing good may have to come at the expense of doing well. Well, the truth is, as was on the cover of my book, The Truth About Green Business, you don't have to choose between making money and making sense. My friend, the late Ray Anderson, the founder and CEO of Interface, the multi-billion-dollar flooring company, said famously, if your sustainability initiatives are costing you money, you're doing them wrong. They should be making you money. So you don't have to choose between making money and making sense. You do have to choose what you're really here to do. What you're really here to do. What's your purpose as a business? My hint is that it's not to maximize profits or to maximize return to shareholders. That's the outcome of business. That's not the purpose of business. So being clear on that, as I think some of you have spoken to in this last session, is fundamental. So, there are lots of pieces on the game board here. Let me suggest that there are a small handful of elements that are in the critical path for business, for companies, and frankly, it will be for countries as well. Number one is to flatten your footprint and your negative impact by eliminating waste of all kinds, waste of energy, waste of materials, waste of water, waste of human initiative and creativity, waste of what my friend Chauncey Bell calls coordination waste. This directly improves operating margins and boosts profits and pays for everything else. Second is to align strategy, innovation processes, the actual offerings of the company with purpose that I spoke about a moment ago, with the imperative of climate, with the challenge of circularity, and really aligning with the well-being of all life. Number two, and that goes very deep, deeply challenging, but even more valuable than the first. One of our clients, a $6 billion manufacturing company in the United States, as we worked them through this second pillar, by their own estimation, the value that was uncovered was equivalent to at least their existing global revenue. Remarkable. Number three, how do we govern our organizations and coordinate activities among the people in them? To my mind, all hands on deck, which is what the UN is calling for, means everybody on deck, everybody on board, informed, engaged. That's why we've created Sustain Online, is to support that process. Everybody with a clear line of sight that connects their actions to the outcomes generated by the organization, to the shared commitments that really constitute the organization. And the secret here is not only high tech, but also the language technology of how we speak with each other in our organizations and in our lives. Fourth is to share value far more broadly among those who create it. And here's a place where I want to appreciate the leadership in India, where you have several companies, I think about a dozen, that are booking people as assets, not as liabilities on the balance sheet. We commonly hear CEOs that say people are our most important asset, but how do we treat them in our management systems? Typically as liabilities and costs to be minimized rather than a resource to be enhanced. Some of what I've just summarized very quickly, you'll find in the Declaration of Leadership for Sustainable Business that we wrote for a client, oh gosh, some 15 years ago. And obviously for all of this, there's more to be said. And let me finish with a call to action. My mentor, Buckminster Fuller, talked years ago about the metaphor of the trim tab. If you imagine a giant super tanker, a ship longer than multiple football pitches, a huge rudder on the back, a rudder that is so big that the hydraulic pressure to try to push the rudder through the water to turn the ship is too great for our hydraulics to manage. So we invented something called a trim tab, which is a tiny rudder at the rear of the main rudder. The hydraulics move the tiny rudder moves the big rudder moves the ship. Bucky said, call me trim tab. Call me that small rudder that moves the big one that moves the ship. And that's how I've tried to imagine myself, not just as a trim tab, but as a trim tab for trim tabs. I see you all, everyone here on this call, as a trim tab, able to move the great ship of the world and also of India. India I see as poised for greatness in this realm. You have a booming economy. You have a highly educated population, deep technical capacity, a deep and ancient culture. And so we look to you to step into leadership that, as several of you have said, will take everyone, boundaryless collaboration. We face here an incredible opportunity to either lose the world or to invent a new and better world. That challenge is to reinvent everything that we do. Our technologies, our supply chain systems, our modes of governance, our responsibilities to each other, to lead the world out of the climate crisis to belonging again to the living world as living beings, as members of the family of life. Not just the vague superficiality, if you'll permit me, of ESG and the struggle over metrics and principles and compliance and so forth, but to reinvent how to do business in the service of life and to do that successfully. My friend Bill McDonough, the architect, phrased it this way. He said, the challenge is to love all the children of all species of all time, for all time. And that may sound like poetry, but in fact, it's a guidance system for business. What if we tested everything we do and every investment we make against the challenge of, are we loving all the children of all species for all time? Or as my mentor, Buckminster Fuller, declared years ago, if humanity does not opt for integrity, we are through completely. It is absolutely touch and go. Each one of us could make the difference. That is why I do what I do, Bucky said. And I suspect that that is why you do what you do. There's another world coming. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Thank you.
Fabulous, fabulous, absolutely wonderful. I've scarcely heard a more passionate, a more articulate, a more clear plea for all of us to act together as one species. And I'll never forget this expression, Jill, business in service of life. I think that is such a powerful way. What a great call of action. I mean, as we come to this last part of our fantastic summit, where we are opening it up for questions and answers, and I'm totally amazed by the value that we have conveyed. And it will be really a lost opportunity if each one of the people here does not share this passion with 10 others and make sure that that network shares it with 10 more each. And that's the way that we can create what Jill calls this fantastic small rudder, which will echo and make sure that the whole world actually starts operating from the philosophy of saving our planet for ourselves. Thank you very much. This was stunning.
Thank you, Shailesh. And let me just, if I may, broaden the challenge or clarify. Yes, we face the challenge of operating as one species. That's the immediate task before us. But I want to invite us to think about being one species in a multiplicity of billions of species on a living world.
Absolutely right.
Tissue-thin film of life wrapped around an 8,000-mile diameter ball of rock, where we all live interdependently. We think of ourselves as the pinnacle of creation, but we are enmeshed in this web of life with all others rise and fall with them, from the big animals that we see to the tiny animals and plants that we can't. And this is a shift in human consciousness. It's actually an old shift. We've been that way before in our history. We've had a different story recently. And so, yes, all one species, all one life on one living planet.
Absolutely. Fabulous, fabulous.
And the challenge for CII is to translate that, lofty statement into the nuts and bolts of doing business every day, successfully and profitably and in service. Thank you, Shailesh.
So nice. And I must say that Snowcap has volunteered to support anyone on this call with a very special tailor-made effort to get you started on the journey that was defined and described in this entire seminar. And I'm sure CII will reach out to every one of you and communicate to you what they, as our sponsors, have generously decided to extend to everyone who is on this call. And so thank you, Snowcats. Thank you, Blue Star, for this phenomenal summit. And we can now move into the question answers. Naina, would you please direct the questions to us?
Sure. I'm requesting participants once again to type in your questions at the top right corner. There is a Q&A tab over there. I have received one question which I have shared on chat with both of you. So if
Yes.
you have a look at that.
Yes, I've seen that question on integrating environmental regulations with climate targets and whether we should call all of this an EIA kind of environment integrated with many other aspects kind of framework. Martin, would you, or Gil, would you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, I could start. Gil and I, we've known each other for a long time, so I'm not sure the response would be that different, right? But in terms of an integrated framework, first of all, I want to say I think the definition E, S, and G is somewhat passé in the sense of talking environment and social, and then governments as a separate. It's about governments of people, planet, and profit. It's governance of the social, economic, and financial aspects, all of it. And that framework, I think, needs to float down into practice into companies. Quite often, this is called bottom line initiatives, which Robert Rubenstein, which is a friend of both me and Gil as well, has developed over many years. And I think we have all those bits in those frameworks in place. They do exist. It's probably more that the awareness of what is possible and what is available is very low at the board levels and at the management levels. You don't have to invent the word. We spent the last 25 to 30 years doing a lot of work for you guys, right?
Good. So let's spread the good word and let's spread all the experience that you have developed.
I would just add to that, Martin is right. We're very much aligned on many things. I don't know the regulatory environment in India, so I would hesitate to comment on that at all. But I would say, yes, integrate everything. Let's break us out of different compartments that are at war with each other and bring it all together. For me, the key word is not governance with respect, Martin, it's coordination. Governance implies a top-down directive to players of what to do. Coordination suggests a much more horizontal, frankly, conversation, the conversations that a company is, as my mentor, Fernando Flores, would put it, the requests and promises that we make to each other is where the life of business lives. And so that's one of the things we need to reinvent, and that means involving not just the board and the executives and the managers, but the entire rank and file at every level of the organization. The billions of dollars of value that I talked before about disclosing often comes from people on the shop floor, at the loading dock, in the accounting office. Once they understand and share the purpose, they become a fountain of creativity from the bottom up as well as from the top down. So I'm looking for coordination across all these concerns across the entire organization.
Fantastic. The other question that I saw on the chat is about how asset managers and investors are factoring ESG considerations into their decisions. And we, of course, heard from JP Morgan, but I just want to share two statistics with everybody on this call. If 2% of the accumulated wealth of all billionaires is made available for a massive vaccination program, the entire planet can get vaccinated. That's one fact. The other fact, this morning I read that the wealth of our world that we have accumulated over the Anthropocene age is $418 trillion. 1% of that can eliminate our carbon footprint to the extent that we would get to below 1.5 in the period that we need to race towards that objective. Just 1% of that.
Yeah.
Now,
Go ahead.
So in the light of that, I feel that asset managers and investors should simply shut their doors to where they see the potential for not meeting this goal that is so important for all life on this living planet. Cannot allow more than 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Unless you put your finger on it, it's not for lack of money.
Yep.
Certainly not. It's not for lack of technology. We know how to do what needs to be done. We have the energy technology. We have the piece of the puzzle. Renewables are now less expensive than fossil fuels. There's no reason not to go here. It's a question of will.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Will we do this? Do we want to do this? To your metaphor of shutting the doors to any options of not doing it, we have a powerful story in the mythos of the United States back in the Apollo missions of the 1960s, when we were doing, flights to take people to the moon and back. And on the Apollo 13 mission, you may have seen the film of this. There was a horrible catastrophe in the vehicle returning to Earth. We faced the prospect of losing 3 astronauts in deep space, and it's a dramatic film with Tom Hanks, and people in Houston are struggling with the problem. And one of the lines in that movie is, failure is not an option. And that was the guidance management frame. If the question is, how do we do better? People will argue endlessly over minor improvements here and there. And if the question is, failure is not an option, what do we do to save ourselves and save life on this planet and the civilization that we know? Then you approach the questions in a very different way. You frame risk in a different way. You do risk evaluations in a different way. You assess cost and benefit in a different way. And if you do that well, you generate unimaginable innovation that doesn't just resolve the immediate crisis, but that trickles to the benefit of everyone.
Absolutely, Jill. I cannot agree more with you. The last question of the day is a very interesting question. And the question is that what is the most powerful thing that ESG adoption can deliver to a corporate? And I would venture to suggest that it can dramatically alter your market cap. And if you're found to be wanting, or if you're found to be greenwashing or cheating on your commitments or your disclosures, you can dramatically lose your market cap. So that's just the financial implication of it. But just imagine making sure that life can continue. What better objective can any corporate really have? And I go back to what you said, Jill. Business in service of life. That is what ESG can deliver. I'd request both of you to add your own punch to what can ESG deliver.
Yeah, from my perspective, as I said, ESG is the same thing as sustainability for business. And if we take another analogy, it's like if we in humanity have been playing a game like football for the last 100 years, it's not about changing the rule for footballs. We're playing a totally new game going forward. It's a new era, as Gil was saying, and ESG can help and guide boards, management, employees, consumers, everybody on what are the roles of this game. How do we need to act and what do we need to learn? The passion is there in people. They want to do good. They want to live in a fashionable, what did I say, a fresh world, right? But we can breathe the air, drink the water, swim and see fish that are fresh, not full with plastics. That would be my note.
Yeah, there's nobody who doesn't want that. Paul Hook, in his new book Regeneration, just came out yesterday, used to say that there's nobody who goes to work in the morning intending to make the world worse, more polluted, more suffering. But that's a side effect of the game that we play. It's embedded in the rules that we play. If our companies are focused on short-term profit and not attention to externalities, managers will act a certain way. We had a client years ago. The company had set one of the earliest and boldest goals of sustainability of any company in the world. And we talked with one of the executives, and he said, I got a real challenge. The company is telling me to go that way. They're rewarding me to go that way. What do I do? Even as a concerned, compassionate person, he was in a dilemma of how does he resolve those. So games are invented by people. We invent the rules. We invented football. We invented basketball. We can invent a game with different rules. that support the coordination of individual people in the common direction and common purpose that we share. So Shailesh, to where you started, it's not just the risk of collapsing your market cap, which will happen to some companies and perhaps some industries. You know, we forget that the Fortune 500 is a very temporary list. Companies appear and disappear on that, like corks. But so the opportunity isn't just the collapse of market cap, but the growth of market cap in recognition of successful service around the common human agenda.
Absolutely. With that, friends, I end this summit with just one word: act now. Thank you all. It has been totally enriching. I'm absolutely delighted and full of gratitude to every one of you who has spent so much time, effort, so much of your commitment, your passion, and really delivered something that we can all remember for a very, very long time. Thank you very much, everybody.